£10 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 26th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates. Now, the country simply isn't working, says Sir Keir Starmer, as he pledges to slash Britain's benefits bill. Shocking figures reveal there are a whopping 627,000 jobless people under 25. Do young people need a kick at the backside? And could Labour get Britain working again?
President-elect Donald Trump has taken to Truth Social, his own social media company, to threaten China, Mexico and, surprisingly, Canada with new tariffs on day one of his presidency. This is in a bid to crack down on illegal immigration and drug smuggling. China warns there'll be no winner of a trade war.
And a campaigner is calling for health warnings to be slapped on bars of chocolate and crisps like we do with cigarettes. Is this a pragmatic move, or is it the nanny state gone mad?
And we'll be getting the latest from Downing Street as more than 2.5 million people sign an online petition calling for yet another general election. I can't get this plain packaged food nonsense out of my head. Henry Dimbleby was a guy actually commissioned by Boris Johnson to do the review into why are we all so fat? And he came back with all of these different answers, such as changing the way that supermarkets are laid out, taxing sugar, plain packaging on all sorts of foods the government deems to be unhealthy. I mean, it's the nanny state gone mad.
Well, I think it's complex. I agree. I don't think changing the packaging is going to make any difference. And I don't think that's what made the difference with cigarettes, really. I think it's a combination of taxation, law changes so you can't smoke in public. I think that's what's really driven the decline in smoking. So I don't think that'll work. But we do have a real issue with children's diets. Like, diets have changed phenomenally since the Second World War, and kids are getting less healthy. And I think there's a lot of factors, like lack of activity and things like that. But also, filling yourself with addictive foods that are high in calories and low in proper nutrients is also not good for our children. So something does have to be done. Whether this is the right thing, I don't know.
I think it all ultimately comes down to parents, doesn't it? If there is a very obese child, that is not the fault of the child.
No, that's right. But on the other hand...
That is parenting that has gone wrong.
That's true.
And One of the really interesting things is just at the same time that this review was published, saying we need to change everything about our supermarkets, regulate and tax and ban and have a big state. Just at that same time, a new drug called Ozempic came onto the market, and for the first year, in a steady sort of half-century of inclining obesity in the United States, this is the first year that obesity is falling in the United States. And it's nothing to do with taxes or plain packaging or the organised... It's Ozempic.
But we don't know the long-term implications of that, and surely it's better to eat the kind of foods that our bodies are evolved to digest rather than to rely on drugs. Anyway,
yes,
more on that argument later.
Two people who certainly don't need plain packaged foods, who are looking incredibly healthy on their honeymoon, are of course Patrick and Emily. They've sent us this picture from a rather splendid and sunny-looking Thailand. I'm very jealous.
I think Patrick did say he's missing everybody, but I'm not sure how true that is. I mean...
Well, Patrick and Emily have said, we're missing you at GB News, but thank you to everyone who's stepping in to cover our shows. We're having the best honeymoon, but it's back to reality this Monday. Emily and I will see you then. That's a message from Patrick.
Indeed. Well, lots more to come, but first of all, your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Miriam, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top story, Sir Keir Starmer says the government had inherited a country that isn't working and the changes would tackle the biggest drivers of unemployment and inactivity. His comments come as the government is promising major reforms in order to reduce the benefits bill by getting more people into work. Official figures show the unemployment rate for young people at 14.8%, up from 12.1% a year earlier. The plans include a £240 million investment to overhaul the current network of job centres across Britain and more funding for mental health services. A youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse to work. However, absent is any mention of a crackdown on sickness benefits. Leading the Conservatives are to label the plan nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Pension Secretary Liz Kendall says the government plans will help young people get back into work and boost the economy.
I want to tear down the barriers to opportunity for people right across the country, including young people, because with 2.8 million people out of the workforce due to long-term sickness, that's bad for them and their living standards, it's bad for employers who are desperate to recruit, and it's bad for the economy as a whole. In order to get Britain growing again, we've got to get Britain working again, and that means a big new change to employment support.
That's as Parliament is set to vote on the Tobacco and Vapes bill, meaning anyone born after 2009 will never be allowed to smoke. Wes Streeting said the number of children vaping is growing at an alarming rate. And he also said it's unacceptable that vapes are being deliberately targeted at children with flavours like Gummy Bear and Rainbow Burst. The legislation includes a total ban on vape advertising and sponsorship, including displays seen by children and young people, such as on buses, in cinemas and in shop windows. 3 bodies have been recovered from a capsized tourist boat that sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt yesterday. Rescue teams had been intensifying their efforts to find 16 people who were missing, and 2 Brits are believed to be among them. The governor of the Red Sea region says 3 bodies have now been recovered and 13 people are still missing. The tourist boat, named Sea Story, sank yesterday south of the Egyptian coastal town of Marsa Alam, with 44 people on board. The nationalities of the people whose bodies have been found isn't yet known. The Met Office says it's committed to learning the lessons from Storm Bert after criticism of its weather forecasts. The Weather Service also defended itself, saying observed rainfall totals were broadly in line with the forecast and the severe weather warnings were issued in advance. The storm, which swept across England and Wales over the weekend, brought torrential rain, flooding and 80-mile-an-hour winds. At least 4 people have died since Storm Bert began, leaving communities badly flooded and turning roads into rivers. The clean-up after Storm Bert continues, with the Environment Secretary warning more flooding is likely. The Duke of Sussex's legal claim against the publisher of the Daily Mail could face a trial in 2026. That is the suggestion from a High Court judge. The Duke of Sussex and other high-profile people, including his close friend Elton John, are suing the publications for alleged breaches of privacy rules by Associated Newspapers Limited. Harry accuses the publisher of hiring private investigators to place listening devices inside cars and recording private telephone conversations. At a preliminary hearing today, Judge Mr Justice Nicklin said it was important to progress the case to an eventual trial. A&L denies all of the allegations. In sport, the Football Association wants 30% of the England men's coaching staff to be from ethnically diverse backgrounds by 2028. The governing body was told earlier this year it needed to work a lot harder to create a diverse pool of candidates by the Black Footballers Partnership. The BFP cited the lack of realistic homegrown options from diverse backgrounds to replace Gareth Southgate when he resigned in the summer. Their data, published last year, found 43% of Premier League players were black, but that hasn't translated into coaching positions. The FA is also looking into increasing ethnic diversity within the Lionesses' coaching staff down to the under-17s and has set a target of 15% compared to the current 4%. Rock star Rod Stewart has been confirmed to play Glastonbury's Legends slot next year, 23 years after his last appearance at the festival. One of the best-selling artists of all time, he'll follow in the footsteps of Dolly Parton, Barry Gibb, Shania Twain and Kylie Minogue by playing the Sunday tea time slot. The news comes shortly after he announced his intention to stop playing large-scale world tours at the end of 2025. The 79-year-old said he was proud and ready to perform at the festival next June. And the world's oldest man has died at the age of 112. John Tinniswood was born in Liverpool in 1912, the year the Titanic sank. Guinness World Records says he died yesterday at a care home in Southport. His family have said in a statement his last day was surrounded by music and love. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past midday, and it's the biggest reform to employment for a generation. That's what we're all supposed to believe, according to the Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall, who's unveiling Labour's long-awaited plan to get Britain back to work today.
Well, a youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse work. But the mention of a crackdown on sickness benefits is nowhere to be seen.
That's curious. The Tories are saying it's nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Goodness me, let's get more with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, who do we believe? Is this a nothing burger, or is this the most seismic reform that we've ever seen?
Well, it's something, isn't it? And something is certainly better than nothing. But it seems clear that a lot of the difficult decisions have been pushed down the road. So today, the government, Liz Kendall, pardon me, the Work and Pensions Secretary, will be unveiling this white paper in the House of Commons shortly. They're focusing particularly on young people. There's 1 million 18 to 21-year-olds who are not in education or employment or in training, and they want to get as many as possible of those back to work. They're talking about a youth guarantee. They're talking about changing the way that job centres work. So they're not about just getting benefits, but also about careers advice, helping people into work. And they're talking about possible benefit sanctions for young people who don't take up any of these offers. Now, some of them sound pretty tempting. For instance, there's £45 million on a trailblazer scheme across 8 British regions, including places like Liverpool and the Tees Valley. Opportunities to do training or get skills with the Royal Shakespeare Company or the Premier League. Of course, there won't be very many of those opportunities, and they'll be incredibly hard to get, I would imagine. But the welfare bill is frankly out of control, and we are the only advanced economy where the employment rate has actually gone down over the last 5 years. So we've currently got 2.8 million people on sickness benefits, basically. It's costing £65 billion a year. That's projected to go up to £100 billion a year by the end of this Parliament. It's simply unaffordable, and the government will really have to try to get those numbers down. Now, part of how they'll try to do that, of course, is getting the NHS waiting list down. They're pouring huge amounts of money into the NHS. That will be part of it, but it sounds like they will need to get tougher too. It's not clear yet how they're going to do that. So we're hearing a bit of the carrot today, but the sticks, I think, are still some way off.
Catherine, thank you so much for that. More from you later. But joining us now is the former Conservative MP, Richard Drax. Richard, thank you for joining us. It's good news that the government is cracking down on worklessness, isn't it? But do you think their plans go far enough?
No, it's quite interesting, actually. I think this is another con from this socialist government, I have to say. And the irony is that the most malicious and destructive budget is going to put more people on welfare, not less. Let's not forget that point. Now, when I was the MP, I called for conscription, not necessarily into the military. That caused a huge furore from the left, expectantly, of course. I didn't say everyone should join the army. What I said was that if they were given 3 chances to do a job, it could be with a charity, it could be the armed forces, if indeed that's where they want to go. If they refused to do that, they lost their benefits and were told to go and do something. Because you can't just sit in your backside and do nothing. It's totally unacceptable.
But Richard, is the issue here not that we have high unemployment? Because we don't. Our unemployment rate is 4%. I mean, it's historically pretty low. Isn't the bigger problem those who are economically inactive, not counted amongst the unemployment statistics, but those who are signed off from work and who would indeed also be signed off from any conscription scheme because of their diagnoses, whether it's mental health or anything else? That's the real problem that the government surely has to tackle.
It is, and it's a big one. I mean, how many times, Miriam, you were an MP along with me, and how many times do we hear of ADHD and all these other issues that the young are suffering from, not least post-COVID? It's very hard to prove whether this is a post-COVID problem or indeed it's more deep-rooted. You mentioned parents, Tom. Not enough is heard of parents. Everyone else is blamed for things going wrong. Parents are never, ever in the conversation, and jolly well should be. So, yes, it's an issue, but that's something that the government's got to tackle. And if they really mean business, that's people who've got to go into, if indeed is necessary, people's homes to find out exactly what is wrong with these people who are not working. Because, as you just heard, the bill is 65 billion, predicted to rise to, I think, 100 in 2030. We can't afford that. It's just crazy. But as I said at the start, one way to get people back to work, and not necessarily to encourage employers, of course, to take people back to work, is to reverse, well, A, get rid of this government, of course, and reverse this malicious and vindictive budget that's destroying the very thing they're promoting, growth. I mean, it's just appalling.
So, Richard, I assume you mean the fact that with the national insurance rises and particularly the change in threshold, there will be fewer low-paid entry-level jobs to go around, making it even more difficult for young people to get onto the jobs ladder.
Of course. I mean, the national insurance is one thing, of course. Employers' national, that's going to rise, as we all know. Many people I know run small businesses. I run a farm down here. Of course, we're going to be affected devastatingly by this, as are thousands of people. I was at the protest last week. And so it's the thing that I was staggered at, no one really has picked up on APR's game, but BPR, that's business relief. So everyone who set up a business, who wants to employ people like we do here, if these reliefs have gone, the enticement to take people on has gone, and they won't. And that is what's happening now. And business leaders across the country are telling the government this. Of course, the government aren't listening, as always.
Of course, you're describing this most recent budget as an anti-growth budget, but couldn't the same criticism be thrown at basically most of the budgets that have happened over the course of the last 15 years? Budgets that you yourself voted for that did very similar things to this budget, whether it was raising taxes or indeed obligations on small businesses. Tory MPs kept on cheering whenever the minimum wage was raised, when it was turned into this peculiar be a thing we call the National Living Wage, which is separate from the Living Wage Foundation's version of a living wage. It's all incredibly complex. But ultimately, the Conservative government and successive Conservative governments put these impositions on businesses, took those rungs away from the ladder and made it harder to employ people.
Well, I didn't cheer, nor did Miriam. I know that for a fact. Yes, we voted for the budget because it's tradition that you do, despite the fact that you voice your opposition to it. And Miriam and I did voice our opposition countless occasions to the chancellors to lower taxes and to make this country more favourable for investment and take on new staff. So we fought like hell for that. But let's not forget, Tom, this was post-COVID. We spent £400 billion, we didn't have, on safeguarding millions of jobs and households and futures and companies. That's going to take time to repay. Now, things were getting better. The statistics were proof of that. And this government, rather than beginning to lower taxation, which it wasn't in a position to do, and we would have been had we stayed in power, the economy is now turning. We would now be in a position to start lowering taxes. And so that is a perfectly reasonable excuse for the way we had to behave, much as though Miriam and I didn't like it. But now, lower taxation, get people to take more people on. What the government is doing now is anti-growth, will destroy jobs, destroy companies, destroy farms. It's utterly destructive, and it is so malicious. I would use the word malice. There's evidence of malice in this budget.
Richard, thank you so much. It's great to see you again, and thanks for joining us this morning. I think two really important points there. One about parents, because for young people who are not even looking for work, you've got to assume that most of them are being supported by parents, probably living at home. The vast majority of the rise in not in education, employment or training is young men. So actually, do parents need to show some tough love and just say to those young men, we're not going to feed you anymore, we're not going to support you anymore, go and get a job?
Or say we're going to start charging you rent to live in your bedroom. Then you sort of have to go out and get a job. But I do think it is so important, those early years. Well, not even really early years, is it? I mean, those people who are 18, 19, 20, 21... Getting routines set in is one of the most important things that you can do. Having the routine where you do get out of bed every morning, where you do go off and do whatever it is, a paper round, I mean, work at the pub, whatever it is. Getting out of bed each and every day, because it's so easy. And I think so often these mental health spirals of despair come from people who perhaps for 2, 3, 4 weeks on the end didn't leave the house. Didn't sort of get the fresh air, and then they enter this sort of doom loop in their own head, which is so hard to then break.
Right. And we've got a chart, I think, that we can show you, showing the causes of people being signed off work sick. And the biggest factor is actually mental health and anxiety and depression. Of course, lots of people, yes, you can see the chart here. So the greatest number of people signed off work is because of depression and anxiety. And then also, I think the fourth factor there is phobias or different nervous conditions. Now, it's not that those things aren't real, it's just that being signed off work is probably not the best way to recover. And actually, in the past, people were told to get on with it, whereas now children are coddled all the way through school and asked about their mental health, which is the last thing you should ask a child, to be introspective.
Although there is the age-old adage that, you know, oh, I've got a bad back, so I can't come into work today. Is it
just the new bad back?
The new bad back is, quote-unquote, bad nerves or anxiety. I'm sure there's quite a lot of that.
I'm sure there is, but I think there's also a real rise in poor mental health because of all sorts of other factors. But the question is being signed off sick the best thing for you, or is actually being in the workplace, being forced to think about something else other than your mental health, is actually that the best remedy? But Labour don't seem to have an answer, because all it is a consultation. There's no change yet at all, so...
A consultation, the only announcements on people who are technically unemployed, i.e. those who are looking for work in the first place, and nothing to do with the far larger group of people who are just completely signed off because of these quote-unquote illnesses.
And which, like you say, unemployment itself is actually very low. Not that we shouldn't care about people getting to work, but the much bigger problem is not working and not looking for work because of signed off sick.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. I swear it is Good Afternoon Britain, despite the topic that we've just been discussing, but plenty more to come. Yes, China says there will be no winner in a trade war against the United States, all as Donald Trump talks tough on his social media platforms. More on that after the break.
Dewbs and Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
This is a topic very close to my heart. I have become fully convinced that social media, smartphones are one of the primary causes of mental health problems in children and many other serious problems beside. Lots of governments are starting to talk about this, but the Australians are well ahead in their use of legislation. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I've got 3 young children and I'm really concerned about... I mean, they're too young to be on social media, but I'm really concerned about what lies ahead for them. I'm not sure I support what Australia's doing, not because I don't think it's a good idea to ensure that age verification is right. I'm just not sure that the age 16 is appropriate. But that's progress. If we effectively, as I do, accept the point that we need some sort of control, then we can move to a proper debate about whether that's 16, 14, 13, whatever it may be. And, of course, there are age restrictions on things like Facebook. I think, from memory, it is 13.
Yes, but it's a tick box.
But it's a tick box, so all you can do is you can just knock. If you're 11 years old, you can just predate your date of birth by 2 years, and you can get on. I think what Australia is proposing is interesting because it will stop young people, maybe without their parents' knowledge, short-circuiting the system because they're going to be asking for proper age verification and ID. That's definitely something we should do in the UK because it's enforcing the existing law. Query, is 16 the right age, Miriam?
I completely agree with it. It's something I actually said should have been done before. And I think what is good about it is that for a long time, a lot of governments have been saying that the actual social media companies should take more responsibility, but they're not going to because it hurts their bottom line. The most voracious users are younger users. So they will pledge that, oh, I'll put the tick box in, but the kid is the one who's going to actually tick the box. So doing something like this is saying that, OK, we will put in legislation that damages your bottom line. And I think it will force the hand because they've said it's only 12 months and they will reevaluate it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 12 and Donald Trump has threatened to impose tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods if, in his words, those countries continue to allow illegal immigrants to come over the US border.
Didn't realise many Canadian illegal immigrants were entering the United States, but there we go. He's threatened to slap an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods over their government's refusal to make promise on a crackdown on drug smugglers too.
Well, let's discuss this further with US political journalist Laurie Laird. Laurie, thank you for joining us. Imposing tariffs. Good afternoon. Imposing tariffs was a big part of Trump's pitch during the election. Do you think he is now going to follow through, and what kind of impact is it going to have on the economies of the countries involved?
Well, look, this is Tariff Man, right? He campaigned on this. He has said this is what he wants to do. Donald Trump convinced American voters that tariffs are a good thing for them. Miriam, you asked about what these tariffs, what effect they would have on the economies involved, and I think you meant Mexico and Canada. Let's look first at the U.S. economy, because there is a body of economic evidence. It is incontrovertible. There aren't economists who, there may be some on the fringe, but most of them agree that the biggest loser when a country imposes tariffs is that country's consumers. It's quite remarkable. A tariff isn't something that a Canadian or a Mexican company will pay to the U.S. for the privilege of importing into the U.S. It is a tax on goods that as they come into the U.S., that tax is paid by U.S. firms that order those goods. Typically, they then take that extra cost that they have paid, the cost of that tariff, and pass it on to consumers. That means consumers in the tariff-imposing country down the line pay a lot higher costs. Mexico and Canada account for about a third of U.S. imports. So we could be seeing, or American consumers could be seeing, bigger, much higher prices on a third of the things that come into the country, which is a really weird way to fight inflation, which is one of the things that Donald Trump promised to do.
The most hilarious thing for me here, Laurie, is that the United States of America was founded off the back of a protest on import taxes. The British Parliament wanted to put a 3% tariff, in effect, an import tax on tea. And in Boston, they were so irate about this import tariff being placed on them, they threw the tea into the sea in the harbour and started a revolution. And now we're at the state where the President of the United States wants to impose taxes not just on tea, but on everything else.
But on everything. Tom, I admire your ability to find humour in this, and I guess it's the only way to look at it, because as you, in your headline, you said China said no one wins from a trade war. That's essentially true. The deputy head of the European Central Bank said the same thing earlier this morning. So we're going to try and find humor, because the reality is really ugly.
Is there not perhaps a national security argument here? Economics to one side, perhaps those in the Trump administration realise that this will increase the cost of goods in the United States, but they think that's a hit worth taking to neuter China.
And that is the question. But let's look at this. It's the reason for this, right? According to Trump, right here, you're talking about national security here, and Trump is talking about immigration. We're penalizing these countries for immigration, also for the sale of fentanyl, an opiate, an illegal drug, into the U.S. Let's look at fentanyl for a second. China doesn't have an excess of this opioid that they're dumping on the American health system. They are fulfilling a demand that Americans have. There's a lot, the research is still trying to figure out why Americans have a much higher, propensity for drug addiction, particularly for opiates. Fentanyl is one of them. But China's not creating this demand. That demand is already there. So doing this, trying to create these weird terms to try and cut drug addiction, which is what Donald Trump said here, as a matter of national security, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. Look at the immigration question. We look at Canada, there's not a whole lot of illegal immigration coming in on the northern border. If you want to look at immigration on the southern border as a national security issue, and this is what the administration is saying they'd like to do, to make it a little more traction there. Mexico sends almost 80% of its exports to the U.S. This could be something that makes them, that kind of propels Mexico to, at least to a negotiating table, to say, look, we're going to try and do something to keep immigrants on our side of the border.
But Laurie, this is not just about immigration. This is about economics as well. And a lot of ordinary Americans voted for Trump because of industrial decline that's been happening for decades. It's been happening across the West ever since Chinese imports and other cheap imports ruined or certainly negatively impacted American industry. And a big part of Trump's argument is to restore those kind of industrial jobs. So how should he go about doing that?
Okay, well let's separate this, because during the campaign, Trump did say that, yes, this is a way to reverse industrial decline. But with this particular announcement, it was specifically linked to the trade of illegal drugs and immigration. That was the linkage that he made. And the implication being, if Canada, Mexico, and China made progress in reducing the flows of immigrants and illegal drugs, perhaps those tariffs could be reduced. In this particular instance, it was linked directly to drugs and immigration. If you want to talk about economics, and I think that's the more important discussion to have, there is absolutely no evidence that imposing tariffs will bring back this heavy industry. This heavy industry has been gone for a very long time. Asking Americans to pay more for things, to pay more for their cars because they're made of steel that is imported, to pay more for food products, is not going to bring these industries back. There's no evidence that it will. And even if it does create some renaissance in American manufacturing, that's years down the road. In the interim, these people, the people who are losing manufacturing jobs, are going to have to pay more for their basic goods.
Well, Laurie Laird, thank you so much for joining us and talking through what will be a fascinating, perhaps even first 100 days of the next US president. Laurie Laird, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show. We're going live to Downing Street as the Prime Minister's spokesman says there will not be an extra bank holiday to mark either VE Day or VJ Day next year. That's to come after your headlines with Tatiana.
Miriam, thank you. The top story. Sir Keir Starmer says the government had inherited a country that isn't working and the changes would tackle the biggest drivers of unemployment and inactivity. His comments come as the government is promising major reforms in order to reduce the benefits bill by getting more people into work. Official figures show the unemployment rate for young people at 14.8%, up from 12.1% a year earlier. The plans include a £240 million investment to overhaul the current network of job centres across Britain and more funding for mental health services. A youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse to work. However, absent is any mention of a crackdown on sickness benefits. Leading the Conservatives are to label the plan nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. 3 bodies have been recovered from a capsized tourist boat that sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt yesterday. Rescue teams have been intensifying efforts to find 16 people who were missing, and 2 Brits are believed to be among them. The governor of the Red Sea region says 3 bodies have now been recovered and 13 people are still missing. The tourist boat named Sea Story sank yesterday south of the Egyptian coastal town of Marsa Alam with 44 people on board. The nationalities of the people whose bodies have been found isn't yet known. A 22-year-old man arrested on suspicion of a shooting in which an 8-year-old girl was seriously hurt has been released on bail. The child was injured along with her 34-year-old father after a gunman opened fire into their car in Southern Row Ladbroke Grove in West London on Sunday. She underwent surgery yesterday and was said to be in a stable condition, while her father has been left with potentially life-changing injuries. The pair were with their 2-year-old sibling and 32-year-old mother, who were both unhurt at the time of the attack. The Metropolitan Police says the suspect, who was held on suspicion of attempted murder yesterday, had been released on bail until early February. And the Football Association wants 30% of the England men's coaching staff to be from ethnically diverse backgrounds by 2028. The governing body was told earlier this year it needed to work a lot harder to create a diverse pool of candidates by the Black Footballers Partnership. The BFP cited the lack of realistic homegrown options from diverse backgrounds to replace Gareth Southgate when he resigned in the summer. Their data published last year found 43% of Premier League players were black, but that hasn't translated into coaching positions. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Compared with the last few days, today's relatively quiet as far as the weather's concerned, fine for most. Still some showers around, but otherwise plenty of sunny spells as this area of high pressure moves in ahead of this low, which is going to bring rain to southern parts overnight and into tomorrow. But for the time being, a few showers to watch out for. northern Scotland with a northerly wind. These will be falling as snow over the hills. And a few showers going into Northern Ireland, parts of southern and central Scotland, far north of England. 1 or 2 showers in the far southeast, perhaps even the odd thunderstorm. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, feeling quite chilly with temperatures in the mid to high single figures for most. Nevertheless, later on it does cloud over, the winds pick up, outbreaks of rain move into Cornwall, then pushing into Devon as the evening wears on. Still some showers in the far south and southeast, running into West Wales as well, and just for the far north of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. But otherwise, across much of Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland under clear skies, temperatures will fall away. A chilly night and some fog patches will form with relatively light winds expected through Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Meanwhile, further south we've got rain and wind turning up overnight. Certainly some heavy rain running along the south and the southeast, followed by blustery showers. That's not going to be welcome news for those areas that experienced flooding through the weekend. So an unsettled start to the day for the south, but a mild start here. Colder further north with fog and frost for parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Brightening up as the day goes on here. And also the rain in the south does clear through by the afternoon. The winds eventually clearing as well, but it will be blustery in the far east and southeast. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Southbound on the M11, slow traffic to an earlier accident just before junction 7 for Harlow North. All lanes have reopened, but traffic remains. London bound on the M20, a lane closure whilst a vehicle has a tyre change. From 9 for Ashford through to junction 8 for Leeds Castle, traffic is coping well. Slow, however, for the anti-clockwise side of the M25 to an earlier broken down vehicle just after 16. Delays are a mile before junction 16. Anti-clockwise on the M25, there's also slow traffic to an earlier accident from South Mims, delays to Waltham Abbey at junction 26. The southbound side of the M40 exit slip road is partially blocked at junction 9 for Bicester. That partial block is due to a broken down vehicle. For now, that's your very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past midday, and we're going to go straight to Downing Street, where our political editor, Christopher Hope, joins us after meeting with the Prime Minister's official spokesman. Chris, what have you learned?
Hi Tom, hi Miriam. Yeah, welcome to Downing Street, a very chilly Downing Street today. Sadly, no warmth expected next year with 2 extra bank holidays. It had been mooted there could well be a bank holiday next year to mark both the anniversaries of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, and VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, the 80th anniversaries. That now will not happen, we're told by the PM's official spokesman. They say here that there are calls regularly to have extra bank holidays, but in this situation they feel they can't really justify it, not least because of the cost of the economy and the services. They say that an important balance must be struck between for businesses and services in the broader economy. The last extra bank holidays we had were, I think, for the Queen's one of the Platinum Jubilee. And I think there was some time off too when the Queen died. And yes, Platty Dewbs, correct. Well done, Tom. And also for the coronation. So it's really done for the royal family and not much else. And also with the sluggish growth in the economy, as witnessed in the budget just 5 short weeks ago, I think the last thing they can do is risk having 2 days of lack of productivity, which may damage the economy even further.
Now, Chris, I believe one of the questions asked to the Prime Minister is about the plan to phase out the sale of petrol cars by 2030, in light of the fact that electric vehicle sales are plummeting and indeed a lot of the manufacturers seem to be in trouble. Will there be any change to that target?
That target will not change. So 2030 is a target for banning the sale of new petrol vehicles. Of course, that was 2035 under the Conservatives. That is 2030. That will not change. They are having a round table. The Business Secretary will tonight address members of the automotive sector. They do recognise the government is a really important business sector, business community for this country, but they are committed to this 2030 phase out. But there will be a consultation published in due course. It'll probably probably, I imagine, deal with issues of enough EV charging points to ensure the lack of this issue of range anxiety, concern about where you might get your charge for EVs, where you might find where the government can help with that. But the key point about this phasing out of new petrol car engines, that will continue to be 2030.
Now, of course, the big point of talking from the government today, or indeed talking point, is the benefits reforms that they want to push forward. All of these predictions that the benefits bill for this country could surpass £100 billion a year by the end of the decade. Are we going to avoid that iceberg?
That's a great question, Tom. That's a question I asked the Prime Minister's official spokesman. Will you say what the target might be by 2030? The forecast is to increase sickness and out-of-work benefits from £60 billion a year to an extraordinary £100 billion by 2030. Now, the Tory party had made an attempt at dealing with that by cutting it, I think, by £15 billion by the end of this decade if they had won power back in the July election. That never happened, but I pressed them quite hard for a figure on that. That didn't come. They're quite clear. They can't set a target, they've told us. We want to address the underlying causes why that bill is increasing. We are expecting more information from the government about tackling the sickness benefit bill in the new year, so we'll see more of that then. But as things stand, that £100 billion figure, the figure which many might judge the success or not of this government in tackling worklessness, is not being dealt with. They did say there in the meeting just now how we have amongst G7 countries, we're the big problem here more than other countries about lack of people being at work. We can do better with that. We're seeing elements today at 1:30 today. We'll see this white paper published on benefits, but we'll see a bigger attempt, I think, at tackling this worklessness issue in the new year. But so far, no attempt to bring down that target yet. A target which few of us will want to celebrate.
Chris, what's your sense of the feeling in number 10? Because normally governments, particularly with huge majorities and coming off the back of an unpopular government, which the last one was, have a sense of a honeymoon period, a sense of optimism, the kind of things that they're going to do and the kind of results that they're going to see. And yet this government is already under attack. Business leaders are saying that the so-called reforms that they brought in are going to have a negative impact on the economy. Is there a sense of optimism in number 10 or are they really struggling?
Well, I think there's trying to get the show back on the road. I mean, that honeymoon period didn't last at all. I mean, the irony of today is they're trying to get more people back into work and back into jobs and off the state's purse, but at the same time, they're making it more costly for companies to employ people. They're increasing employers' national insurance, and then at the bottom end of the market, they're increasing the amount of money paid to young people at the minimum wage level. So it is making it harder to employ people for companies, and I saw that for myself at yesterday's CBI annual conference. But they are trying to get the show back on the road. They haven't really lost any idea of a honeymoon. Failed to happen. That got lost, I think, with the freebie stories about the various freebies given to members of the government. We saw it disclosed through July and August. I think that's part of the problem. I just don't know why they haven't really been ready for government. I mean, some have been saying to me that they were so keen to get the Tories out, they hadn't thought really fully through what they would do in office, and almost they've been sort of bounced into a wake-up call, frankly, in that summer with this row about freebies, free glasses and suits and other items for other members of the cabinet, along with Sir Keir Starmer. They are gradually getting the show back on the road, I think, with some behind-the-scenes individuals who I think have more of a grip on how news develops and how they can grip the agenda. So important nowadays.
Chris, you're not suggesting that soon-to-be Baroness Grey wasn't perhaps the best person to be Chief of Staff in the building behind you. I'm sure you would.
Well, I'm not going to. I think blaming Sue Gray for everything is a cop-out. I think other people around Sir Keir Starmer also have to answer questions themselves. I mean, Sue Gray, yes, she was Chief of Staff. Yes, she hasn't taken up the job as being the envoy for nations and regions. But blaming everything on her, I think, doesn't quite go to the heart of maybe some issues with this government. But maybe I think they are trying to deal with that and address that. And that's probably to be welcome for us all.
Yeah, Keir Starmer used to be someone who said that the buck should stop at the top, and more recently has at least given the impression that the buck stops on those just one rung below him. But Chris, thanks so much for joining us live from Downing Street.
I think that the Labour Party assumed that just not being the Conservatives was all that it needed, and they've got into office and realised that some of the problems that our country faces are extremely sticky, very difficult to solve. Public debt, ageing, all these things cannot be solved overnight, and they can't be solved in a popular way. And now they're wondering what on earth they do at a point when the polls are also at a very low level. It's not easy for them.
Let's be honest. Realise people didn't quote unquote hate the Tories. They hated the government.
They hated the situation. Yeah, they hated the government and they hated the situation that the country was in.
And now that anger has switched from one party to the other simply because they're sitting in the chair that everyone hates.
And still with no real solutions from anybody, let's be honest.
Well, on that cheery note, this is Good Afternoon. I promise it is Good Afternoon.
We'll get happier, we promise.
Well, lots more coming up on today's programme.
We're asking if junk food should come with health warnings like cigarette packets do. A smart choice or an example of the nanny state?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The number of pubs may reach critically low levels.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing is a decline in the number of pubs in Britain, and it's fallen. This is an absolutely astonishing figure. So it's basically fallen 10% in a decade. So do our maths. It doesn't take very long for that to happen. So if that carries on, we'd have, get this, only 1,000 pubs by 2074. So the big question is, what will become extinct first? The bank branch on your high street, or the pub on your street corner? And this is a kind of perfect storm for landlords and landladies of, the cost of labour. Remember when the energy prices were at the high, we just realised just how much energy it keeps to keep the lights on in the local boozer. As well as, as the cost of the golden nectar itself. So, as they call it in Australia.
Well, talking about that, I was mentioning the other day to, was it my father-in-law? I said, when I first started going to the pub, I was 15,
Half a lemonade, half a shandy.
I was nearly 16, I got half a shandy. No, we used to have Monday Club, where a pint of Foster's was £1.50. And my father-in-law was saying, I went to London the other day, a pint was £8.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And when you've got those kind of prices, why wouldn't you just go down the supermarket and get 16 tinnies for £5?
So you're going all Aussie now. Put the tinnies in the esky before you have the bar.
Good day, mate. Why not?
I agree, actually. I think it's concerning. A lot of people look at the high streets and they're very concerned that it's looking quite glum, to be honest. Lots of things are closing. But the reality is it's because people are not buying from the high street. They're not going to the pub, People are just deciding, what they're going to do in their spare time. Are they really going to go to the pub, or are they going to potentially go to, David Lloyd or a Nuffield, join a gym membership? They're just looking at their expenses and just deciding, we're going to actually cut costs,
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 1, and we're asking, should junk food come with health warnings like cigarette packets?
Beg your pardon.
You go.
That's exactly what one campaigner is calling for. Not just a campaigner, someone who was commissioned by the government to write a strategy on obesity. So, has he got a point, or is this a classic example of the nanny state gone mad?
I think this is a really complicated one. Of course, the government shouldn't be telling people what to eat. But on the other hand, an awful lot of our calories are now provided by a very small number of food companies who know exactly what combination of salt, sugar and fat to put in their products to manipulate our bodies into wanting more. It's actually quite a manipulative science.
Because they make tasty food.
Indeed. But we regulate...
What's wrong with tasty food?
Well, nothing's wrong with tasty food, but we regulate other big businesses that provide products that are potentially addictive, don't we? Tobacco and alcohol being cases in point.
Oh, this is a very strange version of the word addiction. It's like saying the internet is addictive or video games are addictive. I mean,
well, video games absolutely are addictive, and there is a huge rise in the treatment for addictive video games.
It's not the same as... You don't get video game withdrawal in the same way that you might from some of the drugs. But I don't think you can compare as that sort of language starts to encroach upon, you know, buying a Mars bar with heroin. Right? I mean,
absolutely not.
We just shouldn't be using the same sort of language about these two things
at all. Yes, but we know that there are different levels of addiction, don't we? And different types of drugs, absolutely. But I think that the problem is that we are, you know, the diet that we are evolved to eat, which is basically natural foods and meats, we are now so far away from that because our bodies are being manipulated, for example, into not feeling full.
There is nothing natural about the fruit that we eat. If we look...
It comes off a tree, Tom.
But it's genetically modified.
Well, yes,
through thousands of years of agriculture, if you look at what bananas used to look like, or
it's
apples
selectively
used
bred.
to look like.
That's
yes,
not
that's genetic
the same.
engineering.
It's not.
It is.
Selective breeding and genetic engineering. I do have a degree in genetics. I can honestly tell you they're not the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing.
No,
selective breeding is modifying the genetics of that.
We are getting off the point. It is, but not by inserting unnatural DNA, as in DNA that didn't originate in that plant.
Yes, it's not gene editing, but it is genetically modifying.
Yes, but through genes and alleles that already exist in that plant, rather than artificially introducing new DNA or DNA from other species. Anyway, we're getting off the point. But the point is, 60% of young boys now are overweight or obese. The consequence of that for our future. Now, there's many causes of that. Lack of activity, you know, too much time on screens. Absolutely, it's not just food. But nevertheless, the amount of calories that we consume now that are fat, salt and sugar, rather than more natural products that are just better for us, is quite alarming.
There's no evidence to suggest that if we had the same number of calories out of, I don't know, carrots, as we did out of Rice Krispie cakes, that would lead to any different level of fat. It's the same number of calories.
Yes, but what have carrots got that chocolate doesn't?
I mean, I'm
fibre,
sure all sorts of things.
And one of the biggest problems we've got is the rise of bowel cancer in young people. What's one of the indications of bowel cancer? Not enough fibre. So if you eat all your calories in salt and sugar, yeah, you might not be any fatter than if you ate all your calories in potatoes, but you will have an awful lot less fibre.
But again, that gets us off the beaten track of what
the packaging
of what Henry Dimbleby, and I find it extraordinary that the government, whenever they want to answer a question, they seem to go to someone whose dad was famous, or someone whose granddad was famous.
Maybe.
Is there no one else that the government could have asked other than the grandson of Richard Dimbleby?
Yes, who wasn't a Conservative. But why don't we make apples and bananas more attractive by packaging them instead?
I think.
Can you make a banana look appealing or a carrot in a way that a Mars bar
I think the environmental protesters would have a lot to say about plastic packaging.
An interesting thought. Let us know what you think on gbnews.com/your say.
Much more to come, including legal challenges on gender, next.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Compared with the last few days, today's relatively quiet as far as the weather's concerned, fine for most. Still some showers around, but otherwise plenty of sunny spells as this area of high pressure moves in ahead of this low, which is going to bring rain to southern parts overnight and into tomorrow. But for the time being, a few showers to watch out for. Northern Scotland with a northerly wind. These will be falling as snow over the hills. And a few showers going into Northern Ireland, parts of southern and central Scotland, far north of England. 1 or 2 showers in the far southeast perhaps even the odd thunderstorm. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, feeling quite chilly with temperatures in the mid to high single figures for most. Nevertheless, later on it does cloud over, the winds pick up, outbreaks of rain move into Cornwall, then pushing into Devon as the evening wears on. Still some showers in the far south and southeast, running into West Wales as well, and just for the far north of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. But otherwise, across much of Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland under clear skies, temperatures will fall away. A chilly night and some fog patches will form with relatively light winds expected through Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Meanwhile, further south we've got rain and wind turning up overnight. Certainly some heavy rain running along the south and the southeast, followed by blustery showers. That's not going to be welcome news for those areas that experienced flooding through the weekend. So an unsettled start to the day for the south, but a mild start here. Colder further north with fog and frost for parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Brightening up as the day goes on here. And also the rain in the south does clear through by the afternoon. The winds eventually clearing as well, but it will be blustery in the far east and southeast. Bye-bye.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on...
Imagine getting the call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock. That is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Restaurant St. Bart's executive head chef Johnny Crowe creates ramen with a British twist, using only the finest UK-sourced produce. As the only restaurant in London to hold both a Michelin star and a green Michelin star, St. Bart's emphasises sustainability and the diversity of British ingredients. Johnny joins me now. Johnny, congratulations on having these 2 Michelins. How do you get a Michelin green star?
Probably a better question for the inspectors, but I mean, I think it's down to a lot of hard work.
What hoops do you have to go through?
So I think it's working every day on it. The sustainability isn't something that you just achieve and then therefore you have it and you can sort of relax. It's about every day trying to be better, trying to make a restaurant and a business that is overly sustainable.
So what things do you do to make it sustainable?
So one of the main things that we've really tried to do is focusing on British produce, and actually, you know, part of that is about sustainability and food miles. A massive part of it for us was also about sort of helping the British economy and the farming economy and our fisheries as well. But yeah, no, the idea...
You have a lot of farms near St. Bart's, which is in the heart of the City of London.
Well, funnily enough, there's an amazing collective called Shrub Provisions who we use a hell of a lot, who work with farmers all around East Sussex. So it makes a difference from flying it in from Kenya or somewhere else like that. But no, like a big part of it was, one, using British produce to cut down on food miles, but also helping sustain our farming industry.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 26th of November, and I'm Miriam Cates.
I'm Tom Harwood. The country simply isn't working, says Keir Starmer, as he pledges or even pledges to slash Britain's benefits bill. Shocking figures reveal that a whopping more than 500,000 jobless under-25s. Well, do young people need a kick up the backside? And how could the government get Britain working again?
And President-elect Donald Trump has threatened China, Mexico and Canada with new tariffs on day one of his presidency in a bid to crack down on illegal immigration and drug smuggling. But China has warned that there will be no winner in a trade war.
And we're live at the Supreme Court as judges commenced a legal challenge on whether transgender women can be regarded as female for the purposes of the Equality Act. Yeah, we're going to be live outside the Supreme Court in just a moment's time, because this is going to be a pretty landmark case.
Yes, it started a couple of years ago when the Scottish Government wanted to introduce more gender balance on business boards, so something not particularly related. But it included in their definition of woman, trans women, so men who have changed their gender legally or just by self-declaration. And 4 Women Scotland took the Scottish Government to court over this definition of what it is to be a woman. They lost, and now they're appealing, and they've taken it all the way to the Supreme Court. So the outcome of this really will determine whether or not you can legally change your gender or your sex for the purposes of the Equality Act.
Now, this is interesting. We won't get a result of this case today. It's just starting to be heard today at the Supreme Court. We're expecting it next year.
Yes.
So it's going to be quite a long sense of deliberation. But is there any reason to suggest why the Supreme Court would find a different outcome to the Scottish courts?
Yes, I think potentially there is, and we'll hear more on this in a few minutes. But basically, this is very undetermined by our law, because on the one hand, you've got the Gender Recognition Act, which says you can change your birth certificate and you can change your sex legally. But on the other hand, you've got the Equality Act that says you absolutely can discriminate against, let's say, men for the purposes of maintaining women-only spaces.
In safeguarding situations.
Exactly. So there is a conflict in our law. So it is a matter of opinion for the judges.
And a lot of people complain when we sort of see all of these legal challenges and what's known as lawfare very often. But I suppose there is a legitimate case for judges to be involved when it seems that there are 2 pieces of statute that clash. Exactly. I think that's basically the only time that it is legitimate to see judges adjudicate on law in a system whereby we don't have some sort of entity that sits above Parliament. Ultimately, what Parliament legislates for is the law of the land.
And if Parliament says men can become women, then in law they can. And that's what we've got to figure out, and hopefully it might lead to some legal change. Anyway, please do send your views on that to us. We'll be reading some out later on in the programme. But first of all, we have your headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Miriam, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. Well, 3 survivors have been rescued and 4 bodies recovered after a tourist boat sank in the Red Sea. That's according to a local official. 2 Brits are believed to be among the missing. The governor of the Red Sea region says 2 Belgians and 1 Egyptian national have been rescued, along with 4 more bodies, although their nationalities are unknown. The tourist boat named Sea Story sank yesterday south of the Egyptian coastal town of Marsa Alam with 44 people on board. Sir Keir Starmer says the government had inherited a country that isn't working and the changes would tackle the biggest drivers of unemployment and inactivity. His comments come as the government is promising major reforms in order to reduce the benefits bill by getting more people into work. Official figures show the unemployment rate for young people at 14.8%. The plans include a £240 million investment to overhaul the current network of job centres across Britain and more funding for mental health services. A youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse to work. However, absent is any mention of a crackdown on sickness benefits. Leading the Conservatives are to label the plan nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's as Parliament are to vote on the tobacco and vapes bill, meaning anyone born after 2009 will never be allowed to smoke. Wes Streeting said the number of children vaping is growing at an alarming rate. And he also said it's unacceptable that vapes are being deliberately targeted at children with flavours like Gummy Bear and Rainbow Burst. The legislation includes a total ban on vape advertising and sponsorships, including displays seen by children and young people, such as on buses, in cinemas and in shop windows. The Met Office says it's committed to learning the lessons from Storm Bert after criticism of its weather forecasts. The Weather Service defended itself, saying observed rainfall totals were broadly in line with the forecast and the severe weather warnings were issued in advance. The storm, which swept across England and Wales over the weekend, brought torrential rain, flooding and 80-mile-an-hour winds. At least 4 people died since Storm Bert began, leaving communities badly flooded and turning roads into rivers. The clean-up after Storm Bert continues, with the Environment Secretary warning more flooding is likely. The Duke of Sussex's legal claim against the publisher of the Daily Mail could face a trial in 2026. That's the suggestion from a High Court judge. The Duke of Sussex and other high-profile people, including his close friend Elton John, are suing the publication for alleged breaches of privacy rules by Associated Newspapers Limited. Harry accuses the publisher of hiring private investigators to place listening devices inside cars and recording private phone conversations. At a hearing today, Judge Mr Justice Nicklin said it was important to progress the case to an eventual trial. A&L denies the allegations. The Football Association wants 30% of the England men's coaching staff to be from ethnically diverse backgrounds by 2028. The governing body was told earlier this year it needed to work a lot harder to create a diverse pool of candidates by the Black Footballers Partnership. The BFP cited the lack of realistic homegrown options from diverse backgrounds to replace Gareth Southgate, who resigned in the summer. Their data published last year found 43% of Premier League players were black, but that hasn't translated into coaching positions. The FA is also looking into increasing ethnic diversity within the Lionesses' coaching staff down to the under-17s and has set a target of 15%. Rock star Rod Stewart has been confirmed to play Glastonbury's Legends slot next year, 23 years after his last appearance at the festival. One of the best-selling artists of all time, he'll follow in the footsteps of Dolly Parton, Barry Gibb, Shania Twain and Kylie Minogue by playing the Sunday tea time slot. The news comes shortly after he announced his intention to stop playing large-scale world tours at the end of 2025. The 79-year-old said he was proud and ready to perform at the festival next June. And the world's oldest man has died at the age of 112. John Tinniswood was born in Liverpool in 1912, the year the Titanic sank. Guinness World Records says he died yesterday at a care home in Southport. His family statement said his last day was surrounded by music and love. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 8 minutes past 1. Now, a legal challenge over whether transgender women can be regarded as female for the purposes of the Equality Act begins today at the UK Supreme Court.
Yes, the case is the latest in a series of challenges brought by the campaign group For Women Scotland over the definition of woman in Scottish legislation, which has tried to mandate 50% female representation on public boards.
Well, let's go to the Supreme Court now and speak to GB News reporter Adam Cherry live from the scene. Adam, what are we hearing today?
Well, we're just hearing the opening submissions from Aidan O'Neill, who is the representative for Women Scotland. He's their barrister, their KC, and he has essentially been outlining the context of this case and why it's important to For Women Scotland. Now, you guys explained before the news bulletins the background to this. It started with a case to do with public boards and whether it should have 50% female representation up in Scotland. And then in 2022, there were further cases where For Women Scotland were defeated and have subsequently appealed, taking it to the Supreme Court today. Now, we've heard from, I'll just read specific quotes from Aidan O'Neill. As I say, he's been the only person really explaining his side so far. And he says that to agree to this, is to capitulate rather than to confront patriarchy. So that's a specific part of their argument, that this agreeing with the Gender Recognition Act's definition of womanhood, which is trans women are legally women, it somehow confirms patriarchy. So I hope to speak to representatives about this specifically shortly. If the certification process takes away rights to those things, spaces, jobs, etc., it's capitulating, and when hospital wards have to accept men and exclude women, women lose out. So it's talking about how women are undermined by this act, and it's important to retain a biological legal understanding within the Equality Act, or women are excluded, as you say, from women-only spaces, and there are safeguarding consequences to that. So that has been the focus so far today. As you said, we won't hear a decision today or even tomorrow. It'll be next year. So there's a long time to go through this, but it's really about that perennial question: what is a woman, at least legally speaking? How do we define it, and how do we protect women's spaces, whilst at the same time recognising that some people, trans people, are seeking protection as well? It's a very complicated argument.
For Women Scotland maintain that the language used in the Equality Act is the ordinary definition of sex, so what you or I might understand to be the difference between men or women. So when in the Equality Act it says that you can legally discriminate against men, let's say, in certain circumstances, like to prevent men from competing against women in sport, to prevent men from entering women's safe spaces, toilets, change rooms, etc. For Women Scotland maintain that that is what the Equality Act means. Ordinary definition of sex. But of course the Scottish Government think that it means whether or not you've got this gender recognition certificate. Now, how might the findings of the court later on this year affect the law as it stands?
Well, exactly. If this is ruled in favour of the Scottish Government, then those women's spaces potentially could be influenced, and trans women could be allowed into them, and therefore some women, like J.K. Rowling, who have donated to this campaign, would argue that the women have been undermined. So it's hugely significant. And so it's been going on for several years. So the consequences of it, when it is decided next year, will have an impact not just in Scotland, but in the entirety of the UK. It's very, very important. Hence why it's very busy here today, because people have a huge interest in it, not just those specifically in the campaign, but the broader public as well.
Cherry, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and catch you a little bit later there outside the Supreme Court. I find this very interesting because the Equality Act was passed in 2010. Mm-hmm. The Gender Recognition Act, I think, came for about a decade before
2004.
That point, or 6 years before that point. I suppose the argument is that the Equality Act is a newer piece of legislation, supersedes the older piece of legislation, or at least one of the arguments, perhaps. But I mean, were there any problems in the UK from the years 2004 to 2010? Was this a big issue?
Well, it's a really interesting question. The reason that the Gender Recognition Act was brought was because of a claim in the European courts by a man who wanted to transition to a woman but stay married to his female wife, because it was before the Equal Marriage Act.
Right.
So that's why the Gender Recognition Act came in. Now,
Right.
of course, it's obsolete now, because you can marry somebody of the same sex, which wasn't the case in 2004. So there are some people who think that we should just repeal the Gender Recognition Act because it no longer has a lawful use. The problem is that the Equality Act is not clear what it means when it refers to sex, because, as you say, in 2010, trans ideology had not hit the mainstream, and it was never
such a
anticipated.
Small part
exactly.
And perhaps that's it was society just muddled along, really, and that was perhaps the least abrasive, most harmonious position that we've had on this issue, where it wasn't dominating news headlines and people sort of just lived and let live.
That's right, and very, very few people wanted to change gender, and those that did not have a political axe to grind and weren't trying to force themselves into women's spaces for political reasons. But unfortunately, that is where we are now.
Is it?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, there are some people who genuinely want to change gender and live a quiet life, but there is a lot of activists out there who wouldn't even call themselves trans, who are actively trying to reduce women's rights by forcing themselves into women's spaces, which is exactly what's happened in Scotland. And of course, a big part of this argument happened in a rape crisis centre in Edinburgh, where the person they employed to lead the rape crisis centre was a man. That's how J.K. Rowling got involved.
Well, Adam Cherry is now outside the Supreme Court with a guest related to this case. Take it away, Adam.
Hello guys, I'm joined by Susan Smith, who is Director of For Women Scotland. Susan, thanks for joining us live on GB News. What's your thought on what you've heard so far? Your KC has been outlining your argument. Why are we here and why is this important?
It's really important for the ongoing protection and preservation of women-only spaces and services. Our KC set out today some of the issues that could arise if the completely mishmash of definitions of what a woman is or what a man is, as outlined by the Scottish ministers, is adopted, and how in practice that will make the operation of single-sex spaces going forward pretty much impossible. So it's huge risk for women, especially women who are going to be impacted by any changes to these services. And that's pretty much all of us, to be honest.
Now, we won't hear the result of this case until next year. Are you optimistic so far? Of course, very early, and we're still hearing, we get to the argument for the Scottish Government, but what's your feeling so far?
It's very early and I really can't say, but I think one thing that is coming through very clearly from our KC, and actually from the arguments submitted by the HRC, is that if we lose, it will be a massive headache that Westminster will really have to deal with, because it's a mess. If the Scottish Government's argument stands, we are in Alice in Wonderland territory.
Can I just ask, so how did we get here? Because our presenters were just explaining that it's really a niche piece of legislation in the Scottish Parliament that led us here. Could you just give us a brief outline of the background of this case?
That's right. It was a piece of legislation that sought initially to define women on a self-identification basis. And we challenged that in Scotland and we won. And then the Scottish Government redrafted the definition and included men who had acquired a GRC and thus changing their legal or certified sex to
gender recognition.
Yes, that's correct. And so we've challenged that, and we're bringing it because that definition depends on how you interpret the Equality Act. So if we lose and their definition holds sway, it means that any service potentially throughout the UK will be impacted.
Do you feel that in the last couple of years there's been a change in the public mood on this topic? Do you feel there's more support, less support? I mean, it's such a contentious issue. That's why so many people are here. But what are your thoughts on the public attitude?
I think the public is starting to realise that this is about women's rights, and it's about something that we've fought for a very long time. Our KC was talking today about all the hoops and hurdles women have had to jump through to get equal representation under law, and now we're facing that being rolled back. So I think people have started to realise this isn't about any other group. It's about whether or not as a society we value women.
Now, finally, we haven't heard the representations from the Scottish Government yet, or Amnesty International make an intervention, but they will say that this is about protecting the trans community, which is a very, very small community which often receives, is a sort of persecuted minority. What's your view on that? That's their position, and what would you say?
I would say that group is protected under law as it stands. They have those protections. What they are wanting to do is erode women's protections, and that's not the same thing as claiming protections. We're quite happy for all groups to have protections, but this is as insane as, for example, deciding that the protected characteristic of disability automatically has to include everyone over the age of 60. It takes away rights from people who need it and extends it to people who probably don't need it.
Susan, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. Thank you. Well, there we go, guys. The hearing will continue at about 2 o'clock. We'll be providing live coverage throughout the day, and I'll be back with you just after 2:30 with the latest.
Well, thank you very much, Adam Cherry. Speak to you then.
It will be very interesting to see the impact that the result has. As you said, won't hear it till next year. But if For Women Scotland win, essentially it will be settled that for the Equality Act, your sex means your sex. So if you're a woman, you're entitled to be in a space with women only. But if they lose, the government does have a huge headache, because potentially that means that single-sex spaces don't exist anymore, and that won't be acceptable to a large amount of the general public.
Or, if they win, let's not forget who the Prime Minister is. Let's not forget that there are 411 MPs out there elected as the Labour Party. I mean, they've got a massive majority of over 170 in the House of Commons. It could be that if the Scottish Government lose, we see proposals brought forward to amend the Equality Act to then revert it, because I mean, 4 Women in Scotland are to some extent arguing against the status quo here. Well, in terms of what would change if 4 Women in Scotland won this case, is that certain provisions that transgender women feel that they can go to now, they would not be able to go.
Yes,
so that would be the change.
It will give legal cover. So at the moment, people who, let's say, run hospitals are unclear, genuinely unclear what the law means, and so they do fear legal challenge if they, for example, try to say that a trans woman can't be on a female ward. If 4 Women in Scotland will win, it will be settled, and they will have the legal backing to say women only means women only. So I think, you know, whether or not you still need legal change, I don't know, but it will certainly give confidence to people running public sector organisations that want to provide single-sex spaces.
Yes, I mean, so I suppose that's an argument. There is also the argument that there will be some vulnerable transgender women who would be at risk going on all-male wards.
Well, that's certainly true, and I think the best accommodation for those people is a private room, because there isn't an in-between space in this. If you're not safe amongst men, but you're not legally allowed to be with women, then a private room. But you see, that also has precedent, because that is providing a service that meets someone's particular needs. So, you know, I don't think that's an impossibility. But it is a really, really important case, and will have significant repercussions, particularly if they lose, because I think the Labour Party is in a very difficult place on this issue, but they can see the way the wind is blowing, and they will have to do something about it.
Yeah, I wonder if the Equality Act as a whole needs some root and branch
or
reform.
The Gender Recognition Act just needs to be repealed now that it's obsolete.
I mean, I just look at some of the protections in the Equality Act. I mean, this is the act that has given ethical vegans the same sort of rights as people who are of different ethnic minorities.
Or have established religious faith. I mean, there's much of it that's absurd. I mean, some of it is just putting together a number of different acts that have been there through the ages, or things like, religious discrimination, freedom of speech, but some of it has created new ways of claiming discrimination.
There is such a broad protection. I mean, there are protections that I think most people would think that the Equality Act protects. I mean, whether you're gay or straight, whether you're white or black.
Race, disability.
And then it goes to philosophy. And if you're seen to have a deeply held philosophy, you have the same level of protections that people do for being a different race, meaning that people who, quote-unquote, are ethical vegans get these special protections in law. It's
this is why the protected characteristic of gender reassignment is a nonsense, because you can decide in the morning that you have it, which obviously you can't decide, oh, I'm disabled today, I'm pregnant today, I'm married today. That's objective.
I think transgender people would probably disagree.
No, but that's not what the protected characteristic is. It's, do you intend at some point in the future to change your gender? And even children have been found in law to be able to have that. So I agree, if it was that you had a GRC, that would be different, but that's not what it says.
Well, much more to come on this topic and many more here on Good Afternoon Britain. Do stick with us.
Including, we have the latest on the Red Sea yacht sinking, as 3 survivors and 4 bodies have been found, with Brits among the missing. We're with our Home and Security editor after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
As Strictly Come Dancing approaches its iconic Blackpool episode, marking halfway through the competition, visually impaired dancers across the country have spoken out about how groundbreaking the casting of Chris McCausland is, who suffers from, if I hope I'm saying this correctly, retinitis pigmentosa, and they've found him particularly inspiring. We've been talking, Sean, about how the casting of Strictly has been inspiring to so many people, but I imagine there'll be lots of people who are watching this at home finding your story of resilience really inspiring, because you've obviously really been through it. Is dancing something that has sort of, helped keep you going through all of those troubles? And what does it mean to you to see casting like this on a show like Strictly Come Dancing?
Like I say, all the things I went through. So those 9 years when I wasn't dancing, I was still dancing in my head and just banging on to other people. Very much, not just people with sight loss. I've been a big advocate for people with social isolation. So many people on their own now, social anxiety, especially since COVID. And I just want people to get out. The stuff that I'm doing and all the stuff Chris is obviously doing, it will inspire others. Again, like I say, just not people just with sight loss. I had so many people come up to me in the early days, guys, and now that say, you know what, Shawnee, I've seen you do it, so I'm just going to do it. But you just got to get over yourself, because if you bother to do the maths, you know, because all it is maths and walking. Yeah. You know, that's all it is.
Maths and walking actually sounds quite difficult.
Sean, thank you.
Oh, come on, mate. Can you shout? Can you walk? Crack on.
Sean, you're an inspiration. Thank you, mate, for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. You're a star, and so glad.
Just before I go, I'm just going to say this is Kev. Here's Kev.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 1. Now, 3 people have been found alive, along with 4 bodies being recovered, a day after a tourist yacht carrying 44 people sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt.
So far, 31 people have been saved, but rescue operations are being coordinated by the Egyptian military and Red Sea Governorate to find the other 9 people missing, including 2 Brits.
Well, we're joined for the very latest with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, I don't think many people were expecting more rescues.
No, but given the conditions, the sea state now, which is quite calm in the Red Sea, the temperature of the Red Sea, it's possible to survive for some time in the water. It may be that these 3 that have been rescued were on some kind of craft that they'd managed to get onto or clung to something. The details of that will become clear as we move on with this story. But I think it does give some hope for those families of those that are still missing, that there is the chance, because a full day after what happened yesterday, and we are still, it seems, recovering people alive, along, of course, with the very sad news that 4 people have been found dead.
Is the assumption that the cause of the capsizing was weather-related?
Well, that's what we're getting in terms of the eyewitness accounts, the suggestion that a huge wave engulfed this particular yacht. It's 140 foot long. It's a decent-sized vessel, 4 decks, and it was capsized and really sank within about 5 minutes. And it's, according to witnesses, appears to be the case that a number of those who are missing may have been down below decks in the cabin. You remember, of course, the tragedy that happened off Sicily in August, where the Bayesian, another luxury yacht this time, in which a billionaire tech entrepreneur, Mike Lynch, family and friends were on board. That particular vessel was also caught in a squall, capsized very quickly, and he and others were below deck and were just disorientated, not able to get out. It was very early in the morning, still dark, underwater. You can imagine that it would be very, very difficult for people really to find a way out.
Just terrifying, given that you link this again to the Bayesian tragedy earlier in the summer. I mean, I think a lot of people assumed that these modern yachts, these modern ships, were impervious to Mother Nature. And clearly, we're seeing now twice in the last 6 months, that's simply not the case.
Yeah, I mean, boats are never impervious to high wave states if they're sort of facing in the wrong direction. Normally, what happens if you've got big waves coming at you is the skipper would steer the boat, the bow of the boat, into that wave to ride out the wave. If they're caught side on, that's when they can capsize. Now, some boats are designed so that when they capsize, they right themselves again. That wouldn't be much good for people that could be on the upper decks, obviously. They can still be washed off. But there's other boats, you know, they fill with water quickly and they can go under, in the case of the Bayesian, in the case, it seems, of the Sea Story.
Well, with the Bayesian, we're given to understand it had a retractable keel, which, had it been down, would have righted the boat in the event of a wave, but had been retracted, given they thought they were in calm water. I wonder if something like that will occur. But it does look that this is a pretty tall yacht, as you say, 4 stories, if for want of a better word.
4 decks.
Above the waterline.
Yes, absolutely. And the boat itself is only a couple of years old and had gone for its recertification in March of this year and was recertified for another year by marine safety examiners. So it doesn't appear on the face of it to be any kind of mechanical issue. What direction was it facing? Was it side on to the waves that were coming in? Did it get suddenly struck by a rogue wave? These things happen, sadly. And, of course, tour boats the world over attract lots of people, but there have been countless incidents, even here in the Red Sea. Another tour boat just in June last year caught fire. 3 British tourists were killed in that particular tragedy. So it's not uncommon for these tour boats to get caught up in terrible events.
And what do we know about the rescue mission? It's been coordinated by the Egyptian authorities. The weather seems calmer now. Are they confident they have the right resources?
Yeah, I mean, you can see there it's pretty calm now, the conditions out in the Red Sea. And the Egyptian authorities announced this morning that they were stepping up, intensifying their efforts to find any potential survivors. They will be buoyed by the fact that they have now found 3 people alive. 2 of them, we believe, Belgian nationals. So the fact that 3 people have been found alive will absolutely redouble their efforts and determination to keep looking, knowing that it's absolutely possible that of these 9 people that are missing, you know, some or all could be found alive.
Well, Mark White, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the latest updates. We'll be back with you as we learn more, of course. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and plenty more to come on today's programme.
Yes, the government is reportedly looking to fast-track the deal to hand the Chagos Islands over to Mauritius before Donald Trump takes office. We'll have more on that after your headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Miriam, thank you. The top story. Sir Keir Starmer says the government had inherited a country that isn't working, and the changes would tackle the biggest drivers of unemployment and inactivity. His comments come as the government is promising major reforms in order to reduce the benefits bill by getting more people into work. Official figures show the unemployment rate for young people at 14.8%, up from 12.1% a year earlier. The plans include a £240 million investment to overhaul the current network of job centres across Britain and more funding for mental health services. A youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse work. However, absent is any mention of a crackdown on sickness benefits. Leading the Conservatives are to label the plan nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. 3 survivors have been rescued and 4 bodies recovered after a tourist boat sank in the Red Sea. The Sea Story was carrying 44 people, including 31 foreign nationals. The governor of the Red Sea says 9 people are still missing. 2 Brits are believed to be among them. The identity of those who have been recovered from the water is unknown. The tourist boat named the Sea Story sank yesterday south of the Egyptian coastal town of Marsa Alam. 44 people on board. A legal challenge over whether trans women can be regarded as female for the purposes of the 2010 Equality Act begins today at the UK Supreme Court. The case is the latest in a series of challenges brought by the campaign group for Women Scotland over the definition of woman in Scottish legislation mandating 50% female representation on public boards. Now, this could have implications for the running of single-sex spaces and services and how measures aimed at tackling discrimination will operate in future. And the world's oldest man has died at the age of 112. John Tenniswood was born in Liverpool in 1912, the year the Titanic sank. Guinness World Records says he died yesterday at a care home in Southport. His family said in a statement his last day was surrounded by music and love. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Compared with the last few days, today's relatively quiet as far as the weather's concerned, fine for most. Still some showers around, but otherwise plenty of sunny spells as this area of high pressure moves in ahead of this low, which is going to bring rain to southern parts overnight and into tomorrow. But for the time being, a few showers to watch out for. Northern Scotland with a northerly wind. These will be falling as snow over the hills. And a few showers going into Northern Ireland, parts of southern and central Scotland, far north of England. 1 or 2 showers in the far southeast. Perhaps even the odd thunderstorm. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, feeling quite chilly with temperatures in the mid to high single figures for most. Nevertheless, later on it does cloud over, the winds pick up, outbreaks of rain move into Cornwall, then pushing into Devon as the evening wears on. Still some showers in the far south and southeast, running into West Wales as well, and just for the far north of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. But otherwise, across much of Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland under clear skies, temperatures will fall away. A chilly night and some fog patches will form with relatively light winds expected through Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Meanwhile, further south we've got rain and wind turning up overnight. Certainly some heavy rain running along the south and the southeast, followed by blustery showers. That's not going to be welcome news for those areas that experienced flooding through the weekend. So an unsettled start to the day for the south, but a mild start here. Colder further north with fog and frost for parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Brightening up as the day goes on here. And also the rain in the south does clear through by the afternoon. The winds eventually clearing as well, but it will be blustery in the far east and southeast. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, hello to you, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Northern Ireland firstly, heading towards Belfast on the M1. All the traffic at a stand at Lisburn Junction 6, a multi-vehicle collision there in the process of being recovered. Queues are building. Avonmouth Bridge, northbound side of the M5 towards the M49 at 18, an obstruction there. Queues building, a lane closure in place. Still flooding affecting many parts of England. Bradford Road in Barthford by the Crown Pub in Somerset is closed, as is the Town Bridge in Bradford on Avon, and William Scott Hill in Banbury, the A361. That's impassable due to flooding. And the M25, both sides of it, currently blocked. Potters Bar to South Mims, junction 24 to 23. There's a police incident, seeing big queues, clockwise and anti-clockwise. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 1. Now, the government is reportedly looking to fast-track the deal to hand the Chagos Islands over to Mauritius, all before Donald Trump takes office.
The government's national security advisor, Jonathan Powell, has even travelled to Mauritius to speed up the transfer of sovereignty before the president-elect's inauguration, who is said to want to stop the deal.
Well, delighted to be joined now by the Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rossendale. Andrew, you've campaigned on this issue for many, many years. Just how shocking is it that we've seen the Prime Minister's national security advisor do this desperate dash in order to hand over our sovereignty of these islands?
Well, shocking is the word, Tom. This is a British sovereign territory which is strategically very important for defence and security. And it's also a place that used to be inhabited by the Chagosian people whose islands it belongs to. So really, this whole situation is a complete betrayal of not only British interests, but also the British Chagosian people who actually own those islands and should be allowed, I hope, one day to return home. So what the Labour government are doing in trying to expedite this is quite shameful, and it goes completely against British interests.
Processes have to happen for this deal to be signed off. Does Parliament have a role? If so, is there enough parliamentary time before Trump's inaugurated to speed this up?
Well, I hope so. I hope we can find ways of stopping it. I think it's an absolute appalling plan, if that's what they're going to try to do this deal, this so-called deal with Mauritius before President Trump takes office. We know that President Trump is very likely to be against this, and to really ignore the concerns of our greatest ally, I think would be a huge mistake. So the government should draw back from this, wait till the new president's elected and revisit this whole situation. So I understand that there would have to be a vote in Parliament on this. It would go to a vote, but we don't yet know the full details. I think because it's a treaty, I think it would come to Parliament for approval. I believe that in the House of Lords there's talk about the treaty being amended to allow the Chagosian people the right to vote in a referendum. I hope that succeeds.
This is, to me, just gobsmacking and frankly fascinating that the British government is scurrying and hurrying to hand over territory because a foreign government seems to have the interests of the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom and hold that in higher esteem than our own elected government does. I mean, we're really through the looking glass here. I suppose 100 years ago it would be the case that foreign powers wanted to take territory off us and we were keen to get to... And now it's the other way round. I mean, what on earth has happened?
Well, it's crazy, and it's completely against the interests of our country. So Mauritius actually has no real claim over those islands whatsoever. Since Mauritius has been an independent country, they have never controlled the Chagos Islands. The Chagos Islands are British. They are a British overseas territory. In fact, the correct name for the islands, Tom, the name that we use is the British Indian Ocean Territory. The importance of those islands is huge because this is a massive air base, a military base used by the United States, which is leased to them by the United Kingdom. I've been there and I know how vital it is for our defence and security in that part of the world. To allow Mauritius to get sovereignty over those islands when we don't really know whether they will then finish up doing some kind of deal with maybe China. We know that they have very close links to China. The whole thing is very dangerous and very wrong, and the government really now need to pull back from doing this deal and look at this afresh. Anything that gives away British territory, I think, is going to be a very large mistake for our country, and I hope the Labour government change their mind very quickly.
Now, Andrew, if they do change their mind, if President Trump is successful in persuading Keir Starmer to think again, he will have to find a way of saving face. This has been an important Labour policy. They have defended it. What kind of off-ramp do you think that Donald Trump could give to Keir Starmer?
I can't speak for the president-elect, but I hope he makes it very clear to our own government that any transfer of sovereignty of those islands is something that the new administration in Washington would be completely opposed to. And look, surely we should look after our own interests first. Why on earth are we worried about what Mauritius wants. Mauritius is not a key strategic ally of the United Kingdom. The United States is a very important ally to the UK, and therefore to give away territories which potentially could then be used by other foreign powers who might be hostile to us in the dangerous world we're now living in, I think it is quite frankly totally wrong move by the government. And the fact they've done it so quickly, they've only been in power, what, 4 months, 4.5 months, for them to rush to do this deal, I just don't understand it. Tom, I agree with you. I don't know what's gone wrong, why the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office have pushed this so quickly. I just think that it is a huge strategic mistake, and we've really got to campaign against this, but also not just about our own interests, but also I think about the Chagosian people who, it's their islands, it's their home, and they have no say. They're not even being consulted on it. They're just being told that the islands are being handed away and they have no rights and no say over what's happening. That can't be right and goes against the principle of self-determination that we fought for in the Falklands War, to give the people of these territories the right to determine their own destiny.
No, it was a real pleasure yesterday, actually, to have on the show Vanessa Kalu, who is a Chagosian national, and she was saying how terrified she is of Mauritius as a country, as an autocratic country that is threatening to lock up Chagosian campaigners for their own sovereignty for up to 10 years, simply for arguing for anything other than Mauritian sovereignty over these islands. I mean, this is a despotic regime that we're potentially dealing with.
Look, this is about human rights, and we have a duty to the British Chagosians. They are British citizens. A lot of them live in the UK at the moment, and yet we've discarded their human rights to hand them over to, as you've outlined, Tom, a country that we can't guarantee that their human rights will be respected. And we already know that the Chagosians living in Port Louis, in Mauritius, they haven't been treated as equal citizens as we treat them here in the UK. And surely our first duty is to the British citizens of the Chagos Islands. We should be looking after their interests, defending their rights and their liberties, not pandering to international opinion and handing over British sovereign territory to a country like Mauritius. It really is completely against the overall interests of the United Kingdom.
Andrew, we're going to have to leave it there, but
thank
you so much for your time. Conservative MP Andrew Rosendale there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should note that the Chagosian people have been protesting outside the British High Commission in Mauritius, but we'll see where that goes. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come.
MPs are set to vote on the Tobacco and Vapes bill, which the Health Secretary calls an urgent intervention to help children avoid a life imprisoned by addiction. That's to come after the break.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Telegraph now with bra news. And Lewis, do you remember when you took your girlfriend for her first fitting?
This is M&S Trans Row. I've got a youngish girlfriend. But
she was youngish when you first met her 20 years ago.
Yes, stay young. I don't know. I don't even want to read it. It's so pervy. It sounds pervy. If I think it's pervy, it's probably very pervy.
Okay.
It says it's first bras for young things. They can't even say young girls.
Well, let's have a look at it. It is it's upsetting. Smart, strong, supported. First bras for fearless young things. So this has been picked up. Actually, Bev Turner from GB News took a photo of it, put it online. It's created a bit of a furore.
First of all, those kind of bras are basically unnecessary. They were when I was that age.
Wearing your bra.
Yeah, those bras. They used to call them training bras, and I don't know if they really were necessary at that time because they didn't have like.
You've really got to the heart of this, haven't you?
The one time I'm not going to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's not. No, they're not really necessary. It's like it's not. Because otherwise...
So really, this is a non-story.
Okay.
Well, I think it's... I don't know. I mean, there was a little bit of me that was kind of like, pick your battles. Is this the hill to die on? I don't know.
The young things, they're saying I would say it's a dodgy advert anyway, it feels like, because saying young things feels like it's as it says here, like objective. It's sort of saying that they're objects.
Yes, but this is my point about the West. Like, are you aware of a company called Pretty Little Thing? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, one of the major brands for young women in this country is called Pretty Little Thing. I just think that's hilarious. Where were the feminists when they named that? So you go on the tube any day of the week and it says Pretty Little Thing, and there's these women in tiny dresses, and I don't know.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 2, and a life imprisoned by an addiction. That's what the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is saying he is trying to prevent with the introduction of the Tobacco and Vapes Bill.
Well, MPs will shortly be debating this bill in the Commons, which aims to protect children and young people from vape companies, quote-unquote, targeting them with flavours like Gummy Bear and Rainbow Burst, although I'm not sure why adults aren't allowed to enjoy flavours like Gummy Bear and Rainbow Burst. But the plan is to eventually stop anyone born after 2009 in a separate prong of this legislation, anyone born after 2009 from ever being allowed to legally smoke.
Well, joining us now is our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis. Will, what can you tell us about this vote today?
Yes, good afternoon. So this is the Tobacco and Vapes Bill. It's essentially the government trying to crack down on young people using vapes before they're legally allowed to under the age of 18. There are essentially two parts to it, which you touched on there. One is the bright colours and sweet flavours that some people argue are targeting children, a younger audience. And then the second part of it is stopping young people born after 2009 from picking up smoking or vaping, ever being able to buy those products. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has said that this will avoid a life imprisoned by addiction for children. They say that it is unacceptable how many young people are using vapes and that it is growing at an alarming rate. Most people would say that they've seen an increase in the number of vape shops on their high streets, including an increase of the number of young people using vape products. But I've been speaking to people here in Long Eaton, Derbyshire, about what they know of vaping and young people particularly using them.
It's not really good for your health. I wish I didn't smoke, and I've tried to quit a few times, so I don't think it's such a bad thing to put in place.
Doesn't make any difference. I mean, on my fags, they all made them green, yeah? And they put dirty lungs on it and stuff like that, but that's not going to influence you to say, oh, I'm going to stop smoking. You're smoking because it's an addictive habit.
But I'm really unhappy about the way they add things to. It's just not simple nicotine.
They should be plain wrappers and sort of not flavoured at all, not to make them so appealing.
I can't understand why people do it, to be honest. You know, I don't see the point of it.
Yes, well, another part of the bill is that they intend to bring vaping advertisements in line with cigarette advertisements. You can't advertise cigarettes anywhere, and they want to do the same for vaping products, so you won't see it on the side of a bus or on a social media advert. You can just hear a helicopter going over the top of Long Eaton right now if you're wondering what that noise is. But it's important to remember that there are a lot of businesses that say that the vaping industry helps people get off of smoking, which can be much deadlier for people.
Will Hollis, thank you very much indeed. Plenty more to come on the show, including plans to get people off benefits. That next.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome along to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The rest of today will be fine for most of us, at first at least, with just a few showers around, but there is some more rain arriving in the south later, courtesy of this area of low pressure, which will move up from the southwest, bringing cloud, rain and wind, and it will affect southern parts overnight into central areas first thing Wednesday before clearing away during the course of the day. So turning wet and windy across the southwest through the evening. The heaviest rain moving along the south coast there. On top of the rain that we've already had recently, that could cause further localised flooding before it eventually turns drier into Wednesday. And there'll be gusty winds accompanying that. Further north, a very different start to the day for Northern Ireland, Northern England, much of Scotland. Frost and some dense fog patches about first thing, especially for Northern Ireland. But showers follow the more persistent rain in the south on Wednesday, drying up across the southwest as well as Wales during the morning. Clear spells there for Northern England, much of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still some showers affecting coastal parts, especially for northern Scotland. A cold start to the day, temperatures well below freezing in some sheltered spots and only slowly recovering through the morning. Nevertheless, it's across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England where we'll see the brightest weather on Wednesday. Again, just a few showers into the north. Some fog patches across Northern Ireland could be slow to clear. Meanwhile, into the afternoon, the more persistent wet weather does clear the east and the southeast. Although it does turn increasingly windy, that's going to make it feel cold. Highs of 11 Celsius in the south, 4 to 6 further north. Then going into Wednesday night, we're going to see extensive clear skies and, as a result, with light winds as well, temperatures dropping away. So widespread frost and some dense fog around first thing Thursday before a bright day generally. Some rain or showers in the west on Friday and Saturday.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements? Or maybe you just like to save it for a special occasion? For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect And then you throw me into the mix, and trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got, in my opinion? The best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and he did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 26th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates. Well, the country simply isn't working, says Sir Keir Starmer as he pledges to slash Britain's benefits bill. We're live in Westminster as one minister says that some benefits claimants are stealing from the state.
And the President-elect Donald Trump, that's the President-elect of the United States, I should say, has threatened China, Mexico and Canada with new tariffs on day one of his presidency. All this in a bid to crack down on illegal immigration and drug smuggling. China says there'll be no winner in a trade war.
And a campaigner is calling for health warnings to be slapped on bars of chocolate and crisps like we do with cigarettes. Is this a pragmatic move or the nanny state gone mad?
And we're live at the Supreme Court as judges commence a legal challenge over whether trans women can be regarded as female for the purposes of the Equality Act.
There's quite a link, I think, between the tobacco and vapes bill and then what's being proposed about food packaging. Because essentially, these are substances that are potentially harmful. And the question is there a role for the state to regulate them for the purposes of protecting children?
Tobacco is harmful. Nicotine is not harmful.
Well, probably not. Although what I think is interesting about vapes is a lot of them have a lot more nicotine in than traditional cigarettes. So although they don't have the same carcinogens in them, they are creating a lot higher levels of addiction. So I've spoken to people who get up in the night to vape. That's how addicted they are.
That's crazy. But I mean, but nicotine. I mean, should we regulate nicotine any differently from how we regulate caffeine?
Because it's a lot more addictive, isn't it?
It's more addictive, but it doesn't do anything to you. It's not. We have pretty robust data on what nicotine does to you, and it's basically nil.
But the problem with the vapes are that these companies put in other chemicals that are largely unregulated, and I think even things like screen wash have been found in some unregulated vapes.
Right, but those are the unregulated ones.
Problem,
so more laws won't affect the unregulated market because it's already unregulated.
Indeed. Well, although the idea behind this, one of the proposals from the last government at least, was to ditch the disposable vapes, which is the things that children particularly are buying because they're cheap.
But now, and some of these have already come onto the market, where they look like disposable vapes, but they've got a little recharging port in them, and people might charge them up, they might not, and they'll act like disposable vapes that get around the law because technically they've got a rechargeable battery. One of the extraordinary things about this bill, though, is it's called the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, but actually it's not just about tobacco and vapes. There is a clause in this bill that says any product containing nicotine Now, that could be these little mouth patches that you have.
Ways of taking it, yeah.
Yeah. Or indeed chewing gum or anything like this. And it will all be regulated. I mean, it could be banned from being advertised. It could be the government could determine how these things can look. I mean, it's a wide-ranging bill that is being advertised in terms of stopping people from smoking, but actually will affect far, far more products.
Yeah, I think there is a big question about, is it the role of government to regulate, protect consumers when companies are selling products that are potentially addictive, particularly when it comes to children? I personally believe that is one area where the state should take an interest, because nobody else can protect the consumer.
Although, of course, we're having this discussion taken for read that children vape, because they do.
They do, absolutely.
Even though it's illegal.
Well, that's also true. So there has to be ways of enforcing law as well as just making.
I mean, I wonder if actually we should just enforce the law we already have before we pile on new reams of law.
Or just tax them.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anyway, please let us know what you think. Visit gbnews.com/your say. But first of all, we have your headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. The top stories. We start this news bulletin with some breaking news that a US Air Force spokesperson says a small number of drones have again been spotted flying near US Air Force bases in Suffolk. The UK authorities are also working to help ensure the safety of the sites. The development comes after unidentified drones were previously spotted between Wednesday and Friday of last week over the same 3 air bases. The US Air Force at the time said it was unclear whether they were considered hostile. More on this breaking story as we get it. Meanwhile, the Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall has announced the Job Centre will be brought together with England's National Careers Service to reform a system which she warned feels like you're back in the 80s or 90s. Introducing the Great Britain Working White Paper, Ms Kendall told the Commons, we will create a new Jobs and Careers Service, overhauling job centres from a one-size-fits-all service that focuses on administering benefits into a genuine public employment service. Official figures show the unemployment rate for young people at 14.8%, up from 12.1% a year earlier. The plans include a £240 million investment to overhaul the current network of job centres across Britain and more funding for mental health services. A youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse work. 3 survivors have been rescued and 4 bodies recovered after a tourist boat sank in the Red Sea. The Sea Story was carrying 44 people, including 31 foreign nationals. The governor of the Red Sea says 9 people are still missing. 2 Brits are believed to be among them. The identity of those who have been recovered from the water is still unknown at this time. A police watchdog says the husband of a woman whose body was found in the boot of a car had been arrested 2 months prior over her domestic abuse report. The Independent Office for Police Conduct also said it would investigate police contact with 24-year-old Harshita Brella and her husband Pankaj Lamba. Ms Brella's body was inside the boot of a silver Vauxhall Corsa parked in Ilford in East London in the early hours of the 14th of November. Her husband, Lambert, is the prime suspect in the police investigation. An international manhunt to find him continues. Detectives suspect he's fled the country. A legal challenge over whether trans women can be regarded as female for the purposes of the 2010 Equality Act begins today at the UK Supreme Court. The case is the latest in a series of challenges brought by the Campaign Group for Women Scotland over the definition of women in Scottish legislation mandating 50% female representation on public boards. It could have implications for the running of single-sex spaces and services and how measures aimed at tackling discrimination will operate in the future. The Duke of Sussex's legal claim against the publisher of the Daily Mail could face a trial in 2026. That's the suggestion from a High Court judge. The Duke of Sussex and other high-profile people, including his close friend Elton John, are suing the publications for alleged breaches of privacy rules by Associated Newspapers Limited. Harry accuses the publisher of hiring private investigators to place listening devices inside cars and recording private telephone conversations. At a hearing today, Judge Mr Justice Nicklin said it was important to progress the case to an eventual trial. A&L denies all of the allegations. The Football Association wants 30% of the England men's coaching staff to be from ethnically diverse backgrounds by 2028. The governing body was told earlier this year it needed to work a lot harder to create a diverse pool of candidates by the Black Footballers Partnership. The BFP cited the lack of realistic homegrown options from diverse backgrounds to replace Gareth Southgate, who resigned in the summer. Their data published last year found 43% of the Premier League players were black, but that hasn't translated into coaching positions. The FA is also looking to increase ethnic diversity within the Lionesses coaching staff down to the under-17s and to set a target of 15%. And the world's oldest man has died at the age of 112. John Tinniswood was born in Liverpool in 1912, the year the Titanic sank. Guinness World Records says he died yesterday at a care home in Southport. His family said in a statement his last day was surrounded by music and love. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2. Now, it's the biggest reform to employment for a generation. Well, that's if you believe the Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall. She today unveils Labour's long-awaited back-to-work plan.
Well, a youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse work. This is how people are reacting to it in Derbyshire.
There doesn't seem to be much available to them, and as I was saying, like, if you're that desperate, you'll end up working in a warehouse or something. And I did that when I was like 21, and working days, working nights, days into nights, all day, every day. It broke me mentally and physically. So I ended up having to leave due to depression and mental health and stuff like that.
Well, I've got a son. He lives in social accommodation, and he's on universal credit, and they pay for his room, and he's been told that if he gets a job, he'll have to pay full rent for his room, which is over £300 a week. It goes on the courses that the universal credit puts him on, but there's no incentive there for him to get a job.
Well, let's get more on this now with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, you heard in that interview there, the lady talking about her son, who, if he gets a job, he will lose so much benefits, he can no longer afford his room. Are these kind of disincentives to work things that the government is keen to tackle?
Well, you would hope so, because certainly that is something that we know is happening, that it simply often isn't worth people's while to work. But we've heard the debate starting about this in the House of Commons in the last half hour, and Helen Whately, who's the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, said basically Labour have had 14 years to think about this. Is that it? And she pointed out that benefits are already conditional. So the government are trumpeting the fact that young people could lose their benefits if they don't take up one of these offers, this youth guarantee that they're talking about of training, employment opportunities, working to expand the role of job centres, also mental health support. We know there's been a real crisis with that. But a heated exchange going on in the House of Commons. Liz Kendall, the current Work and Pensions Secretary, of course, hitting back and saying the only people who dodged difficult decisions on welfare are the Conservatives. But there is a mounting bill. Welfare is costing this country an absolute fortune. We've got 9 million people economically inactive, including 1 million 8 to 21-year-olds who are not in education or training or work. We've got 2.8 million people off on sickness benefits. That's costing £65 billion a year, projected to rise to £100 billion by the end of this Parliament. And the Prime Minister's spokesman was asked about that in lobby at lunchtime and wouldn't deny that that's where we could be heading. So the government really need to get a grip of this. But in terms of sort of the hard measures that they might need to take, that looks like that's some way off.
That's extraordinary. We could be seeing an almost doubling of the amount of cash. The billions that we're funneling into people who are simply not going to work. But correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, this announcement from Liz Kendall, which is taking benefits away from people if they refuse a job, that's only people classed as unemployed. That's just 4% of the population. The far larger group of people are those people who are signed off not because they're classed as job seekers, but because they're classed as unfit to work medically.
Yes, because the unemployment numbers are actually quite low, but there are millions of people on and out of work benefits, many of whom, because they're classified as too sick to work, many disabled people who would like to work but don't feel that they've got the opportunities. And COVID has had a really massive effect. Hundreds of thousands of people left the workplace then and quite simply haven't come back. And I think of all the advanced economies, we are the one whose employment rate has actually gone down over the last 5 years rather than up. So we really do need to address that. But no easy answers, of course. Part of it is the waiting list. We've got astronomical waiting lists, millions of people waiting to start treatment on the NHS. The NHS getting a lot of money. We'll have to hope that those waiting lists will come down soon and that some of those people that are on them will then be able to get back to work.
Catherine, one of the announcements in the DWP's press release says that the government will offer an apprenticeship for every young person. But there seems to be no detail about how that may be delivered. Do you know any more about that?
No, there's a few high-profile bits and pieces, including they're allocating some 45 million for these trailblazer schemes across 8 regions, including Liverpool, including the Tees Valley, working for getting skills training like the Premier League or Channel 4, the Royal Shakespeare Company. It sounds amazing, but I suspect that the numbers of those places will be pretty limited, and of course they'll be ferociously competitive. But we do have employers saying there's huge skills shortages. A third of the vacancies are because they can't get people with the skills. Meanwhile, we're churning out huge numbers of graduates with vast amounts of debt who then cannot get graduate jobs. Apprenticeships are very great to talk about, but in fact quite hard to get. Something's really gone quite wrong somewhere.
OK, well, Catherine Forster, thank you very much for that overview. A curious one, which I'm sure the government will have to return to. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come, including...
A small number of drones have again been spotted flying near US Air Force bases in Suffolk. We'll have the latest with our Home and Security editor after this.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
A Tesco store on a Scottish island has defied locals by ignoring pleas to stay closed on Sundays.
Tesco's has said that no member of staff in Stornoway would be forced to work on a Sunday and that it had received a significant amount of positive reaction to its plans.
Well, let's talk now to the Minister of the Reformed Presbyterian Church, Reverend Kenneth Stewart. Good morning to you, Reverend Stewart. You're trying to keep Sunday special, and if Tesco are going to open up, that means it won't be quite as special for you.
Well, yes, good morning, and thanks for having me on. Yes, Tesco, for some reason, they claim it's not economic advantage, but for some reason they've decided to go against hundreds of years of tradition on this island and the deeply held religious convictions of many, many people, including, of course, their own customers who are really grieved by this decision. We come obviously from the standpoint that a day of rest is effectively mandatory. It's a human right, along with the other 10 commandments which have undergirded our moral and legal fabric in society. It actually enshrines the human right to a day of rest. And of course, in the UK, that's been eroded for many, many years. Incidentally, it's still far more respected on the continent. But for us here, the Sabbath or the day of rest has been very, very important. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And for some reason, Tesco have decided just to go against that.
And Reverend Stewart, we were actually talking about this earlier, how in European countries, I mean, even in France, which is a secular country, still very few shops will open on a Sunday.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. And a small number of mystery drones have been spotted flying near US Air Force bases in Suffolk. This follows the sightings of small unmanned aerial systems that were seen last week over RAF Lakenheath and RAF Mildenhall. What, if anything, could be happening here?
Well, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, is with us in the studio. Mark, is it aliens?
Well, you never know. It's a real head-scratcher, I think, this one, because military sources are suggesting that the drones in question are not of the hobbyist variety. There was about half a dozen of these drones seen, and they appear to be coordinated in the way that they were flying over 3 RAF bases in particular that are home to US service personnel. RAF Lakenheath, which is home to the 48th fighter wing, which operates the F-15E Strike Eagle aircraft along with the F-35A Joint Strike Fighter aircraft, RAF Mildenhall and RAF Feltwell as well. And there are some reports that actually some of these F-15 Strike Eagle aircraft went up with a view to intercepting those drones. Flight radar sites show multiple sort of circling of the area around these bases from these Strike Eagle aircraft. So that's not been officially confirmed by the military, but they have said that they are investigating a number of incidents that took place between the 20th and the 25th of November. So what was that, yesterday, the 25th? Yeah, so pretty recent in terms of the last sightings, and some real concern about potentially who could be behind this. There's no evidence that the drones were gathering sensitive intelligence or posed any significant threat, but no evidence that they weren't, because they don't know who's behind them. And of course, suspicion will turn to the likes of Russia, because Western intelligence agencies and militaries are more than aware of the potential grey zone threat posed by Russia, and we've seen that in operation in this country and elsewhere in recent years. So that is one potential avenue, but until they can actually get to the bottom of where these drones are, maybe bring them down or confiscate any of them, they won't necessarily be able to track the source.
Well, I assume that it is illegal to fly a drone over RAF bases, so there are certain areas in the UK where you are not allowed to fly hobbyist drones, like you say, and of course that applies to all drones. But do we have any technology that's capable of bringing these drones down? So I know, for example, Israel absolutely does. It has ways of taking control of drones that come over the border from potential threats. Do we have anything like that, any way of protecting our own bases?
Yes, we do, and that technology has grown in sophistication in recent years, particularly after, you might remember, in 2018, a number of incidents over quite a few days at Gatwick Airport, which closed down that airport for 3 days. 1,000 flights were cancelled. You missed a flight.
Yeah.
Well, you were one of 150,000 passengers who missed flights because of 3 days of disruption. And all these years later, police have still not got to the bottom of who was behind these drones. A couple of drones that were up over Gatwick, buzzing the airfield for, as I say, 3 days back in 2018. And you're right, it is illegal to fly over sensitive sites such as airports. Hobbyist drones have inbuilt technology that doesn't allow you to fly it any closer. Basically, it rings an alarm, tells you you're getting close, and then just stops you going any further anyway. So that is another indication of why perhaps these are drones that are not belonging to sort of hobby.
And there's a fascinating dynamic here militarily, which is the growing asymmetry of warfare. You're mentioning the F-15s that are on these air bases, F-35 aircraft, hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. Whereas a threat can be posed to these aircraft with drones that cost a few £1,000s to produce. And this is what we've been seeing in Yemen, this is what we've been seeing in Ukraine, that kit that costs close to, costs tens or hundreds of millions. It can be taken down by kit that costs very, very little indeed. This is shifting all sorts of surveillance, all sorts of reconnaissance, all sorts of warfare.
Yes, absolutely. Military planners across the world, but obviously from our point of view, here in the UK and other Western allies are now absolutely re-examining their defences against the likes of drone attack and less sophisticated missile attacks, as well as more sophisticated missile attacks from the likes of hypersonic missiles. But the drone attacks in particular are of concern because they can be so cheaply manufactured in vast quantities. In fact, just overnight, there was another huge attack involving 150 odd drones on Ukraine. A number of them were shot down, but quite a few got through and caused significant damage as well. So they can, despite being very cheap and easily manufactured, cause some significant damage if they are weaponized. But of course, they don't have to just be weaponized. They can be used for gathering intelligence, or they could be used just to cause the kind of disruption that we saw at Gatwick. That would also fall into the kind of grey zone use of drones as well. So it's being investigated. No sightings that we know of today, but military personnel across the country on the lookout at RAF bases and other military installations for the potential for drones.
Well, we'll be following that closely. Mark, thank you very much. Security editor Mark White there.
Now, Donald Trump has threatened to impose tariffs on neighbouring countries, Mexico and Canada, if, in his words, the countries continue to allow illegal immigrants to come over the US border.
He's also threatened to slap an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods over their government's refusal to make good on a promise to use the death penalty on drug dealers.
Goodness me. Well, we're now joined by the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Gift. Thomas, thanks for joining us here. I mean, a lot of people are still trying to work out if Trump's campaign rhetoric will actually turn into US government policy. I suppose this is one indication that it might.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Whenever Donald Trump chose Scott Bessent as the new Treasury Secretary, I think many thought that that was an orthodox choice, a traditional choice, maybe somebody who wouldn't be poised to ratchet up tariffs. He had said before that Trump's tariff proposals were a quote unquote maximalist position and that they were essentially only useful as bargaining tools. But seemingly overnight, Donald Trump has come out and said, yes, we're serious. Yes, we're going to do this. And we're going to do it first and foremost to our neighbors, to the south in Mexico and to the north in Canada, including China as well.
Does Trump want to use these tariffs to punish political enemies? Or does he also have an eye on the American economy? He's talked frequently about restoring American industry. He got huge numbers of votes from people who have lost out because of the decline of American industry over the years. Is there a sense that these will be used as an economic boost as well as a diplomatic weapon?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. So Donald Trump has really been ideologically consistent on trade, even dating back to the 1980s, 1990s, particularly vis-a-vis China. He says China is eating America's lunch, and increasingly he says that Europe is eating America's lunch as well, because he says that they're basically just not playing by the rules, and sort of the US's net exports are so out of whack that this is hurting America. He's talked about trying to bring back these industrial bases in the United States, particularly in the Rust Belt. But obviously, you know, there's also some politics here as well. I mean, he's basically saying that he's willing to blow up the Mexico-US-Canada trade deal. And I don't think that it's necessarily all about trade. It's also about sort of accusing some of these countries, including Mexico, namely about permitting illegal immigration and permitting drug trafficking as well.
And again, all of these tariffs are being used in this bargaining position that perhaps Trump's comments overnight, he's expecting or hoping that then Mr. Trudeau or whoever else it is comes back and saying, OK, this is what we're going to do in return. And then they sort of never materialise. Is this yet again the art of the deal?
Well, if you're Donald Trump, you're basically saying that we're going to coerce or force these countries into compliance. Whether that's actually going to be successful or not is hard to say. I mean, Donald Trump is coming in with a mandate in the United States, and he feels like he can kind of do whatever he says. He did win the election, and first things first, he's talked about tariffs. He's never been shy about that. But at the same time, the big question is how these other countries are going to respond. Are they going to lie down? Are they going to take it? That's really a big question.
I suppose it depends on the relative economic strength of those countries. But looking particularly at Mexico, that seems to be where the majority of the immigration crisis is. Obviously, Trump formally talked about building a wall. Is he hoping that these economic sanctions will be more effective than that potentially difficult plan?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump only got about 2% of the wall done during his first administration, despite making that kind of a marquee part of his platform. But the Republican Party, the Democratic Party now, also realizes that immigration is in a crisis in the United States. I mean, there's just no way around it. The Biden administration has not handled it well. Donald Trump is coming into office saying that he's going to crack down on it. And I think he wants to tackle this problem from every angle. So I do think that we're going to see legislation to try to up some of the security measures on the border, also try to get more of the wall done, and at the same time use trade as an apparatus of diplomacy, or you might say coercion.
OK. Well, Dr. Thomas Gift, the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
I think it's really interesting to see what's going to happen here, because there is, of course, the diplomatic angle, the anti-illegal immigration angle. Yeah. But also, Trump wants to restore American industry. And what Biden and what the left try to do is subsidise industry, potentially. Yes. And this is another way of doing it. Now, whether it works or not is a different matter, but it's very important to Trump politically to revive American industry.
Absolutely. The trouble is that with industry, it's not just about, making the car in the United States. What about the components for that car? Exactly. What about the raw materials for that car? Are they going to really dig every single bit? And because ultimately, if you have import tariffs, every single component of that car that they need to build will then be more expensive. So it's not just going to sort of, in some ways, subsidise that construction of that car, but that car will be more expensive to build.
The long-term aim would be to have the complete supply chain made in the US, but that will take a long time. There'll be a lot of pain in the process.
And you'll lose comparative advantage. I mean, the money that will be going into opening up mines in the United States could have been going to much more productive economic activity, and everyone will be relatively poorer as a result. I mean, Adam Smith found this stuff, ironically, in the year 1776 when he published The Wealth of Nations.
The political wins of the last 20 years, 15 years especially, are in the West. People are fed up of losing industrial jobs to places like China, and they would prefer economic security, perhaps, over endless cheap goods.
Economic security, of course, is fleeting, because are we going to see a United States that rejects the AI revolution? I mean, let's be real. Are humans going to be building cars in 30 years' time? No.
I mean,
it's going to be robots building cars.
So the whole swathe of manufacturing and industrial jobs that used to provide secure income for working class
they're
men,
not going to exist. They're not going to come back.
Well, we'll see what happens in China.
Well, look, we're going to have large language models and all the new versions of AI. All those robots are going to be producing what humans do now. I mean, if you want to be an economy that continues to move forward and doesn't fall into stagnation, you've got to accept new technology, and that means you've got to accept some decline in some jobs.
Every time there's a tech revolution, people say, oh, there'll be no more physical jobs. It hasn't happened.
Yeah, because the jobs move elsewhere. Because we stop being farmers and we become sort of manufacturers, and then we stop being manufacturers and we become people in the service sector.
We'll always need physical stuff.
Yes, but the robots will make it.
We'll see, we'll see. Anyway, lots more coming up on today's show. This is Good Afternoon Britain, and we'll be back outside the Supreme Court as a legal challenge is launched over whether trans women can be regarded as female. That's after your headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. The top stories. Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall has announced the Job Centre will be brought together with England's National Career Service to reform a system which she warned feels like you're back in the 80s or the 90s. Introducing the Get Britain Working White Paper, Ms Kendall told the Commons, we will overhaul job centres from a one-size-fits-all services that focuses on handing out benefits into a genuine public employment service. Official figures show the unemployment rate for young people at 14.8%, up from 12.1% a year earlier. The plan includes a £240 million investment to overhaul the current network of job centres across Britain and more funding for mental health services. A youth guarantee will see unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds lose their benefits if they refuse work. 3 survivors have been rescued and 4 bodies recovered after a tourist boat sank in the Red Sea. The Sea Story was carrying 44 people, including 31 foreign nationals. The governor of the Red Sea says 9 people are still missing, 2 Brits are believed to be among them. The identity of those who have been recovered from the water is unknown. And a police watchdog says the husband of a woman whose body was found in the boot of a car had been arrested 2 months prior over her domestic abuse report. The Independent Office for Police Conduct also said it would investigate police contact with 24-year-old Harshita Brella and her husband Pankaj Lamba. Ms Brella's body was found inside the boot of a silver Vauxhall Corsa parked in Ilford in East London in the early hours of the 14th of November. Her husband Lamba is the prime suspect in the police investigation. An international manhunt to find him continues. Detectives suspect he's fled the country. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Compared with the last few days, today's relatively quiet as far as the weather's concerned, fine for most. Still some showers around, but otherwise plenty of sunny spells as this area of high pressure moves in ahead of this low, which is going to bring rain to southern parts overnight and into tomorrow. But for the time being, a few showers to watch out for. Northern Scotland with a northerly wind. These will be falling as snow over the hills. And a few showers going into Northern Ireland, parts of southern and central Scotland, far north of England. 1 or 2 showers in the far southeast, perhaps even the odd thunderstorm. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, feeling quite chilly with temperatures in the mid to high single figures for most. Nevertheless, later on it does cloud over, the winds pick up, outbreaks of rain move into Cornwall, then pushing into Devon as the evening wears on. Still some showers in the far south and southeast, running into West Wales as well, and just for the far north of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. But otherwise, across much of Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland under clear skies. temperatures will fall away. A chilly night and some fog patches will form with relatively light winds expected through Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Meanwhile, further south, we've got rain and wind turning up overnight. Certainly some heavy rain running along the south and the southeast, followed by blustery showers. That's not going to be welcome news for those areas that experienced flooding through the weekend. So an unsettled start to the day for the south, but a mild start here. Colder further north with fog and frost for parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Brightening up as the day goes on here. And also the rain in the south does clear through by the afternoon. The winds eventually clearing as well, but it will be blustery in the far east and southeast. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Problems in Suffolk this afternoon, the southbound side of the A12, just between the Seckford roundabout and the main road. That's the Martlesham bypass, part blocked, very slow going, and obstruction there continues to cause delays. Still queuing to both sides of the M25, South Mims to Potters Bar, junction 23 to 24. It follows an earlier police incident. All the traffic's been released now, but queuing both ways. Plenty of parts of England still affected by flooding. In Bedfordshire, the A428 in Turvey by the Olney turn-off is impassable. The Town Bridge in Bradford on Avon in Wiltshire is closed because of flooding. Bradford Road in Barford, the A363 by the Crown Pub closed for flooding. And also in Somerset, Bath Road in Kelston, that shut between Kelston and Bitton. Again, flooding there means no way through. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 20 minutes to 3 o'clock, and there's plenty more coming up on today's show. But before that, Martin Daubney is up at 3 o'clock. Martin, what's coming up on your show today?
Well, Britain isn't working, and somebody with a man with a plan, you can guess, Lee Anderson. He thinks they should be picking potatoes in tents, cut benefits. We're way too soft in work-shy Britain. It's time to have a bit of tough love. Lee Anderson joins me in the studio. Remember the Bibby Stockholm? Well, locals in Bassetlaw are furious after hundreds of asylum seekers from that barge have been dumped on their community. I'll be joined by a councillor who's blown the whistle, making allegations that the asylum seekers are jumping housing queues in a total betrayal of the locals of Bassetlaw. And, you know, in Britain, it's doom time. But in the Falkland Islands, it's boom time. The oil field underneath the Falklands is now twice the size of that in the North Sea. And guess what? As an independent sovereign nation, they don't adhere to Ed Miliband's net zero rules. They don't adhere to the Paris Climate Agreement. It'll be boom time for the Falkland Islands. They'll be gushing with joy as the oil flows. And who better to lift the glass of the Falkland Islands than Simon Weston? I'll be joined by the Falklands legend on my show. Loads to go at 3 till 6.
Absolutely fascinating story, Martin. I'm just not sure that Ed Miliband will be able to
contain himself.
Well, I don't know. Do you not suspect that whilst everyone's sort of jumping for joy with this black gold, Ed Miliband will swoop in and be the villain of the piece?
Well, he might try, but I think the Falklands, this could be a very, very interesting constitutional case. And it shows you treats these territories as a precious jewel, not as a commodity to simply give away to Mauritius.
Very good point, Martin. Looking forward to it. 3 o'clock.
Well, a legal challenge over whether trans women can be regarded as female for the purposes of the Equality Act begins today at the UK Supreme Court.
The case is a latest in the series of challenges brought by the campaign group For Women Scotland over the definition of woman in Scottish legislation. Yes, this legislation brought in by the Scottish Government was to mandate 50% female representation on public boards. But what does that mean?
Well, let's go back to the Supreme Court now and speak to our GB News reporter, Adam Cherry. Adam, how is the case progressing?
So the case resumed at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We're still hearing from the representatives for 4 Women Scotland. Now their barrister is making the case by using what he calls nonsense examples as a result of relying on a gender recognition certificate to allow for transgender women to participate in, for example, women's sports. He also gave the example of a heterosexual pregnant man who obtains a gender recognition certificate and therefore is legally understood to be a woman, who would then be allowed to access lesbian association groups who would have no choice, in his words, but to admit natal men into their ranks. So demonstrating, again, what he calls absurd or nonsensical outcomes if the Equality Act is enforced to allow transgender men to participate in female spaces. Now, earlier today, I also spoke to Susan Smith, who is the director for 4 Women Scotland. She's in the court hearing the case behind me right now. This is what she had to say about why the case is so significant.
It's really important for the ongoing protection and preservation of women-only spaces and services. Our KC set out today some of the issues that could arise if the completely mishmash of definitions of what a woman is or what a man is, as outlined by the Scottish ministers, is adopted, and how in practice that will make the operation of single-sex spaces going forward pretty much impossible. So it's huge risk for women, especially women who are going to be impacted by any changes to these services. And that's pretty much all of us, to be honest.
Now, we won't hear the result of this case until next year. Are you optimistic so far? Of course, very early, and we're still hearing, we get to hear the argument for the Scottish Government, but what's your feeling so far?
It's very early and I really can't say, but I think one thing that is coming through very clearly from our KC, and actually from the arguments submitted by the EHRC, is that if we lose, it will be a massive headache that Westminster will really have to deal with, because it's a mess. If the Scottish Government's argument stands, we are in Alice in Wonderland territory.
Now, that case, or this case we're hearing today, will continue tomorrow, but it will also, or rather I should say, it will not be, they won't respond to it, until next year. So it's a long way to go, but it's hugely significant. As you heard there, women's rights campaigners arguing that women's only spaces are sort of being invaded by those who identify as women but were not born as such. On the other hand, we'll hear from representatives from the Scottish Government tomorrow who will argue that the transgender community represents a very small slice of society and they are persecuted. And Amnesty International are making an intervention tomorrow, making the same point. So still a lot of argumentation to go, a long time before we hear the result, but a hugely significant case which will have implications not just for Scotland, but for the UK as well.
Thank you very much, Adam, and I'm sure we'll be following the progress of that case and also the judgment next year, which could have significant impact on the whole of the UK, actually.
Yeah, well, it's one to watch. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and coming up, is it time to put health warnings on chocolate and crisps in the same way that we do for cigarettes? Well, that's to come after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Online dating apps are still the go-to for millions of British adults, with 1 in 10 using them to look for a romantic connection.
Yes, are you one of them? Let us know. But with many apps introducing subscription fees and complex algorithms, the world of online dating has never been harder to navigate. So who better to join us to discuss this than Mr. Tinder himself, Stefan Pierre Tomlin. You have been dubbed Britain's best-looking eligible bachelor.
Yeah, so this happened back in 2016. Got an email from Tinder, and it was like, "You're the most swiped man on Tinder."
So just explain to us, for viewers who don't know, what is swiping? What does that mean on Tinder?
Yeah, so on Tinder, the app, if you swipe left, that means you don't like the person in front of you, and if you swipe to the right, that means you like that person.
Do you mind still being associated with that? It's a good thing.
Well, it made me who I am now, and I love sharing how I was successful, and now I'm like a dating expert.
What's your situation now? Are you with anyone? Are you still single?
So I'm seeing someone at the minute. Things are going well, and I'm a dating expert, so I'm always giving advice to people
Does she know your title of most swiped?
Of course, who doesn't?
Yeah,
It's quite hard. It's quite hard being the most swiped man on Tinder because you get a label on you. So I find it harder than anyone else, to be honest.
And where did you meet her? That's the big question.
At an event.
So not on Tinder?
Not on Tinder, ironically.
So for all that troubled online, there's actually a real life rendezvous. Which,
I mean, I have met people on Tinder in the past, and it has worked. Well, it didn't work, but yeah.
I need to know how to do the famous Stefan Smolder.
That camera is not a camera. That is your best friend, that's your lover. So you really smiles from the camera, so it goes like this.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 minutes to 3 o'clock, and should junk food come with health warnings like we slap on cigarette packets?
Well, that's exactly what one campaigner is calling for. Has he got a point, or is this just a classic example of the nanny state gone mad?
Well, delighted to say joining us now is the former presenter of the popular Fat Families programme, Steve Miller. Steve, thanks for joining us. What do you make of this peculiar proposal?
I think it's a great idea, actually.
No.
I mean, we can't keep moaning that everyone's too fat and then say all of a sudden say we're going to put warnings out to help people and to change behaviour and modify behaviour, and then suddenly say, oh no, we can't do that. We're going too mad. It's nanny state, etc. And I'm not a nanny state advocate. You know that. But I think in reality, the warnings can work on foods that make us too fat, similar to what they did with smokers. And but the key here is this. For warnings to work, they've got to be strong. And the research showed us that with cigarettes. So they've got to be very visual. They've got to be very in your face. And I guess what this guy, whoever he is suggesting, is suggesting that we have a much more gentle health warning, which wouldn't work. So I say, go more full on, warnings that say, if you're too fat, think before purchasing, maybe even being creative. And you're going to think I'm off my rocker here. But what you could have on foods that are high in calorie, well, on low calorie, you could have a small backside. On medium calorie, you could have a medium backside. And on big, fatty foods, you could have a whopper of a backside. Now, you might think I'm a bit loopy saying that, but there's method in my madness because shock tactics work. Yeah. And to change behaviour psychologically, you have to emote people.
I think you're totally right, Steve, because it's worked on me. I have never bought a cake in Costa Coffee since they started putting the calories on. And when you realise it's 500 calories for a mass-produced cake, you don't think it's worth it. So I think this could work. Now, could you help us? Because Tom and I have been arguing all morning about whether or not ultra-processed foods are actually quite exploitative in the way that they hack into our taste buds and they tell children that they're not full and they're addictive, whereas Tom thinks that I'm being ridiculous and authoritarian and that's the nanny state. Which of us is right, please?
I think the answer to that is this, is that we've got to learn to control food and stop talking about what's in it and stop talking and analysing every piece of food, whether it's processed food or health food. Let me tell you why. My research in my business tells me that the vast majority of people know what they should eat and not eat to be slim, to actually be slim. Now, in terms of addiction to food and the stuff you raise around that, I think that needs a lot more investigation. So I wouldn't want to comment on that. But I think the message here for Britain is we've got to, am I allowed to say it? We've got to man up or woman up or they up, person up. We have got to get a grip We are so soft on fat. We encourage people to celebrate fat.
Steve, I think you raise a very, very good point about the sort of general wave of so-called fat acceptance movements and all the rest of it. But I do want to raise a potential problem with your buttock-based plain packaging mechanism. And that is, I'm fairly sure there are quite a few gentlemen in this world who might be attracted towards the larger buttocks placed on the packet of Frosties or whatever it is you're doing. I mean, I can think of a number of songs that celebrate the size of people's backsides. So perhaps you'd need a different sort of system.
This afternoon,
bellies.
Tom.
How about
bellies? Well, it's simple. Listen. I'll just make the backside hairy. It'll sort it out then. You won't get the men after it then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think the other key message here is, warnings. Let's start saying to people, well, you're too gorgeous to be fat. Imagine signs around a supermarket. You are too gorgeous to be fat. It would make people do this. Stop, look, and listen in their head. Should I put it in the trolley or not?
Steve, on a more serious note, increasing numbers of people are getting concerned about not only the obesity crisis, but the role of big food companies in promoting foods, particularly to children, that are unhealthy. And I think the House of Lords Food, Diet and Obesity Committee just reported a couple of weeks ago about this and looking at recommendations to government. And, of course, Donald Trump's pick for Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is very, very concerned about these big companies. Do you think there is a move to crack down on some of these international food corporations?
I think there should be a crackdown in terms of parenting, to be quite honest. I take the other opinion. We've got to stop blaming the food man. We blame the food manufacturers. We blame the government. We blame our genetics. All a load of old codswallop if we can get control over it. When it comes to child obesity, parent power is where you go. And I'm sorry, in the UK, yes, we have great parents that do a great job with their kids. We have some dire parents who rear their kids when it comes to their health. That's the reality. We've got to stop pussyfooting around. We've got to be much more direct, like they do in South Korea, like they do in Japan, and their obesity rate is around 5-6%. Ours in the UK is around 25-26%. It's because they don't get all uptight about, oh, you're fat shaming me, you're fat shaming me. Listen, do you want to live or not? I mean, and these warnings work. Look at, it's like speed warning.
Steve, it'll be a brave politician who is as direct as you are, but a pleasure to speak, as always. Thanks for joining us.
Well, food for thought, shall we say.
Very good.
Thanks for joining us.
Martin's next.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome along to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The rest of today will be fine for most of us, at first at least, with just a few showers around, but there is some more rain arriving in the south later, courtesy of this area of low pressure, which will move up from the southwest, bringing cloud, rain and wind, and it will affect southern parts overnight into central areas first thing Wednesday before clearing away during the course of the day. So turning wet and windy across the southwest through the evening. The heaviest rain moving along the south coast there. On top of the rain that we've already had recently, that could cause further localised flooding before it eventually turns drier into Wednesday. And there'll be gusty winds accompanying that. Further north, a very different start to the day for Northern Ireland, Northern England, much of Scotland. Frost and some dense fog patches about first thing, especially for Northern Ireland. But showers follow the more persistent rain in the south on Wednesday, drying up across the southwest as well as Wales during the morning. Clear spells there for Northern England. Much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, still some showers affecting coastal parts, especially for northern Scotland. A cold start to the day. Temperatures well below freezing in some sheltered spots and only slowly recovering through the morning. Nevertheless, it's across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England where we'll see the brightest weather on Wednesday. Again, just a few showers into the north. Some fog patches across Northern Ireland could be slow to clear. Meanwhile, into the afternoon, the more persistent wet weather does clear the east and the southeast. Although it does turn increasingly windy, that's going to make it feel cold. Highs of 11 Celsius in the south, 4 to 6 further north. Then going into Wednesday night, we're going to see extensive clear skies and, as a result, with light winds as well, temperatures dropping away. So widespread frost and some dense fog around first thing Thursday before a bright day generally. Some rain or showers in the west on Friday and Saturday.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed so.
Imagine getting a call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock. That is absolutely fantastic.
For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's